Chapter 3778. At the same time, at the end of the Golden Dragon Mountain, 100,000 miles away from Jitianqing, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and Yank were leading more than 2,000 Sir God experts in a fierce battle against 4,000 people from Xuanji Grotto. Although the 4,000 Sir Gods came from different forces, their leaders had been assassinated by Jitianqing. However, not long after the battle began, 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders led 300 Golden Dragon Guards to take over the Sir Gods. The 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders were very powerful. They were the best among the middle-level godly kings. The 300 Golden Dragon Guards were also top-notch Sir God experts. Among them, there were a dozen Golden Dragon Guard captains who were low-level godly kings. Comparing the two sides, Xuanji Grotto had more people and more powerful experts. No matter how much Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others fought bravely, it was impossible for them to turn the tide. So far, the battle had lasted for 30 minutes. More than 800 Sir Gods from the 10,000 Demon League had died. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and Yank were also severely injured. Their robes were stained with blood, and they looked battered and exhausted. As for the 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders and the dozen Golden Dragon Guard captains, they were obviously in a much better state. Although they were also injured, they still had the advantage in numbers. However, they still had the advantage in numbers, and their injuries were lighter. If the battle continued to drag on, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others would definitely be defeated. Therefore, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others were also paying attention to the other end of the Golden Dragon Mountain. They were worried about Jitianqing's safety and prayed silently in their hearts. Jitianqing was also very anxious. In order to get rid of the godly kings in front of him as soon as possible, he even changed his usual style. If it were in the past, he would definitely kill those godly kings completely. He would even smash their godheads into pieces. He would never let them escape. But now, he only wanted to end the battle quickly so that he could rush to the 10,000 Demon League's soldiers and his friends. Just now, in this short period of time, he had killed another 6 God Kings. Now, only the War Dragon King and the 12 God Kings were left. Sword of Destruction. In his anxiety, Jitianqing found an opportunity to absorb the power of the 5 elements world and used this ultimate skill. The 10,000-meter-long golden sword of light slashed toward the Battle Dragon King and the 3 God Kings with devastating power. At that moment, the sky was sliced apart by the sword light, and a huge crack appeared in the void. Unparalleled divine might and heaven-reaching sword intent enveloped the Battle Dragon King and the 3 God Kings, making them unable to move. Their faces were filled with fear and despair. Not far away, the 9 God Kings were also heavily injured. Seeing that shocking sword slash down, they were scared out of their wits and fled in panic. Even though they knew that the sword was not aimed at them. However, the might of that sword light was too shocking. They didn't dare get too close for fear of being caught in the crossfire, so they naturally had to flee as far as possible. At this critical moment, the War Dragon King roared angrily. He was actually able to maintain his calm and join forces with the 3 God Kings to create a temporary formation to block the attack. Kaboom! In the next instant, the heaven-splitting divine sword of light slashed into the battle formation created by the 4 God Kings, striking the huge 5-colored barrier of light. Following a deafening explosion, the 5-colored light barrier instantly collapsed, and fragments of divine light burst out in all directions. The violent shockwave formed a 5-colored torrent that swept into the distance. However, the divine sword of light did not weaken as it struck the War Dragon King and the 3 God Kings. The protective divine light and armor of the 3 God Kings shattered on the spot. Their bodies also exploded into bits and pieces, spraying into the sky along with their blood. The 3 God Kings were killed on the spot, and even their godheads shattered. Even the strongest of them, the War Dragon King, was sent flying thousands of miles away with blood spurting out of his orifices. His protective divine light had already shattered, and so had his armor. Even the divine spear in his hand cracked, and its light became extremely dim. Boom! With a loud explosion, the War Dragon King crashed into the ruined Golden Dragon mountain range, creating a huge crater in the ground and sending dust into the air. He lay at the bottom of the crater, covered in blood and dust. His appearance was too horrible to look at. Cough, cough, his injuries were too severe, and several cracks had appeared on his divine body. He could not help but cough and spit out dirty blood. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing flashed and appeared above the crater. War Dragon King, die! Ji Tianxing roared as he slashed down with the sword of burial of heaven. As long as he killed the War Dragon King, the Xuanji Grotto Heaven would lose its commander, and chaos would ensue. However, what Ji Tianxing did not expect was that the 9 God Kings, who were scared out of their wits, would charge over without any regard for their own safety and join forces to stop him. "Don't you dare harm the Grand Marshal! Long Tian, you bastard, I'll kill you! Long Tian, let's die together!" The 9 God Kings attacked Ji Tianxing in a frenzy, shouting and roaring at the top of their lungs. There were even people who stood in front of him and resolutely self-destructed. Ji Tianxing was confused. Weren't these God Kings scared out of their wits? Why did they suddenly become so brave? He focused his eyes and realized that the 9 God Kings were all commanders of the Golden Dragon Guard. It was obvious that the War Dragon King held an extremely high position in their hearts, and they revered him greatly. In order to protect the War Dragon King, they would rather die in battle. Swoosh! Swoosh, swoosh! Ji Tianxing swung the sword of burial of heaven and killed 3 God Kings in an instant. However, the other 6 God Kings were not intimidated by him. They continued to charge over as if they had gone mad. There was even someone who shouted at the War Dragon King, "Grand Marshal, run!" The War Dragon King forced his heavily injured body to stand up at the bottom of the crater. Seeing the Golden Dragon Guard commanders risking their lives to save him, he was filled with hot blood. His eyes were red and he was extremely angry. However, he was not an impulsive person. He knew that everyone had sacrificed their lives to save him. If he acted rashly, everyone would have died in vain. Thus, he roared angrily, "Brothers, I swear that I will avenge all of you!" After shouting, he decisively turned around and fled, flying into the depths of the mysterious Grotto Heaven. Ji Tianxing subconsciously wanted to chase after them, but the 4 God Kings didn't fear death and kept pestering him. 2 of the God Kings had already self-detonated. Boom! Boom! Following 2 loud explosions that shook the 9 heavens, 2 dazzling balls of 5-colored divine light exploded in the sky. Like 2 huge mushroom clouds, they rose and rolled in the sky and quickly spread out, covering a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles. The self-destruction of 2 mid-level God Kings was enough to destroy the entire Golden Dragon mountain range. In that instant, Ji Tianxing did not have time to dodge, so he could only escape into the primordial chaos bell. The 4 God Kings closest to him were all covered in blood, and they looked wretched and hideous. However, when they saw the War Dragon King escape, they all looked as if they had been relieved of a heavy burden. Immediately after, they were engulfed by the dazzling divine light. Like snow under the scorching sun, they quickly melted and disintegrated. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3779. The shockwave from the 2 godly kings' self-destruction swept across the entire Golden Dragon Mountain like a colorful flood. After the shockwave reached a radius of 100,000 miles, it spread out for another 100,000 miles before gradually dissipating. Fortunately, this was the Xuanji Grotto Heaven, where the space was stable. The Golden Dragon Mountain was personally refined by the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor, so it was extremely sturdy. Therefore, the power of the 2 godly kings' self-destruction was halved. If this was any other region in the Dragon Realm, the power of the 2 godly kings' self-destruction would be enough to turn everything within a radius of 300,000 miles into ruins. However, the self-destruction this time only turned the majestic Golden Dragon Mountain into dilapidated mountains and ravines. When the shock wave reached a radius of 100,000 miles, its power was halved. Although it also destroyed many mountains, and forests. However, the godly kings and godly lords who were engaged in the battle did not suffer much damage. Only about 2,000 unlucky godly lords, who were close to the explosion, were blasted into smithereens by the shockwave. There were also about 1,000 godly lords who were severely injured by the shockwave. They were unconscious or had lost their ability to fight. About 4,000 people were unlucky. Half of them were from the 10,000 Demon Alliance, and the other half were from the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. As for the godly kings, they all had life-saving methods and trump cards, so they were basically fine. However, this self-detonation caught everyone off guard and gave them a fright. Whether it was Xue Shang, the commander of the Golden Dragon Guards, the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, or the others, their hearts were in their throats as they were extremely worried. Everyone was very anxious as they secretly wondered who had been forced to self-destruct. How was the battle between Ji Tianxing and the Battle Dragon King? Why was someone forced to self-destruct? Therefore, the battle between the two sides stopped for a moment. Without a doubt, the people who had besieged and harassed Ji Tianxing had all been dealt with. The Battle Dragon King was severely injured and had escaped. Half of the 40 godly kings who besieged Ji Tianxing had their divine bodies destroyed. Only their godheads were left and had escaped. No one knew where they were hiding. The other half were killed on the spot and had their bones crushed. Of course, their quintessence fragments and spatial rings had all fallen into Ji Tianxing's hands. A moment later, when the overwhelming divine light shock wave dissipated and the loud noise that reverberated between heaven and earth disappeared, the primordial bell of primordial chaos reappeared. Shua. This simple and unadorned pitch-black divine bell was located at the center of the God King's self-detonation. It had withstood the most terrifying power. Although its defense was strong and invincible, it was not injured. Ji Tianxing, who hid in the God Clock in time, did not suffer any harm. However, it was still sent flying tens of thousands of miles away by the violent impact, smashing into the ruins at the edge of the Golden Dragon Mountain range. 100-mile-wide crater was created on the ground, and the surrounding area was densely covered in cracks, looking like a spider web. Ji Tianxing controlled the primordial chaos bell and rushed toward the end of the Golden Dragon Mountain range. The Battle Dragon King had already escaped. For the time being, he didn't have any thoughts of eliminating the Battle Dragon King. He just wanted to hurry over and help everyone. The primordial bell of primordial chaos turned into invisible dust and flew quickly in the sky, approaching the battlefield at an extremely fast speed. Ji Tianxing released his divine consciousness and scanned the surrounding tens of thousands of miles. He quickly saw that the 10,000 godlords from the Myriad Demon Alliance and the mystical Grotto Heaven were fighting in several different battlefields. Due to the impact of the two God Kings' self-detonation, the few battlefields had temporarily calmed down. Both sides had stopped fighting. However, it was obvious that the Myriad Demon Alliance had fewer people, and the mystical Grotto Heaven had the upper hand. Fortunately, the difference in the number of God Kings on both sides was not that great. The mystical Grotto Heaven originally had more than 210 God King experts. Before the battle began, Ji Tianxing had already assassinated more than 80 of them. The 40 God Kings that had besieged him earlier were all killed by him. At that moment, the mystical Grotto Heaven only had about 80 God Kings left. As for the Myriad Demon Alliance, including Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and Chao Qingyu, there were only 72 God Kings. Although they did not have the advantage in numbers, it did not affect them too much. Ji Tianxing believed that victory would belong to the Myriad Demon Alliance in the end. The shockwaves from the two God Kings' self-detonation had temporarily calmed the battlefield for 100 breaths. However, after both sides came to their senses and recovered, they continued to fight. It was as cruel as ever. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue, Bai Feng, and the others became more and more worried and anxious. There were a few times when they could not help but go to the area of the explosion to see what was going on. Their injuries had worsened, and they were practically covered in blood. They had also used up more than half of their divine power and were gradually weakening. Could it be that the young master did not defeat the War Dragon King and those God Kings and has met with misfortune? This thought flashed through the minds of the left and right protectors and Hu Xinyue. The three of them began to feel pessimistic, and their expressions became more and more serious. Fortunately, at that moment, Ji Tianqing's voice suddenly rang out in their minds. The War Dragon King has escaped with heavy injuries. I am safe and sound. Hold on for a while longer. Once I have dealt with the other battlefields, I will come and help you. Everyone was in a state of despair. When they heard Ji Tianqing's words, it was as if they had heard a heavenly voice. Their despair and pessimism were swept away. The pain and exhaustion that covered their bodies also disappeared in an instant. Everyone's spirits were lifted, and they became energetic again. Their fighting spirit was high. Although they looked around, they did not see Ji Tianqing's figure. However, they guessed that Ji Tianqing must have a motive for hiding and not appearing. Therefore, the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue and Bai Feng, were no longer anxious and worried. The four of them cast their spells in an orderly manner and joined forces to restrain Shueshang. On the other side, Ji Tianqing steered the primordial chaos bell and quietly flew to the battlefield where Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others were. At that moment, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others were severely injured, and their divine power was also very weak. The 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders who were besieging them were still very strong, and their injuries were relatively light. They watched as the 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders closed in on them. They caught a flaw in Chao Qingyu's defense, and 2 of them immediately used their ultimate skills to kill him. Instantly, Chao Qingyu was drowned in divine light, and hundreds of laws and divine powers were about to strangle him to death. At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing brazenly attacked. He waved the Burial of Heaven's sword and slashed out sword shadows that filled the sky. Bam! 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 With a series of muffled sounds, the divine powers of the 2 Golden Dragon Guard commanders were defeated, and Chao Qingyu was safe. Seeing Ji Tianqing suddenly appear, Chao Qingyu, Yank, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku were all stunned for a moment. Then, they were filled with joy. As for the 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders, when they saw his appearance, they were instantly shocked and filled with fear. They knew that the Battle Dragon King and the 40 God Kings had been besieging Ji Tianqing. Now that Ji Tianqing had appeared safe and sound, didn't that mean that, without waiting for the 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders to think carefully, Ji Tianqing had already attacked at lightning speed? He waved his sword and a cold gleam appeared. Sword of Daytime. That extremely bright cold gleam instantly expanded by hundreds of millions of times. It turned into a blazing golden sun that covered the sky and swallowed the 6 Golden Dragon Guard commanders. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3780. The 6 Golden Dragon Guards reacted differently under the dazzling sword light. Some of them turned around and ran away in fear. Some of them roared in despair. Some of them knew that they couldn't escape, so they tried their best to resist. Kaboom! However, everything they did was in vain. With an earth-shattering explosion, the dazzling sun exploded. Billions of pieces of golden light wrapped around the flesh and blood of the commanders. Countless blood flowers bloomed in the sky. The 6 Golden Dragon Guards were all middle-level divine kings. How could they resist Ji Tianqing's sword principle unique skill? In an instant, 5 Golden Dragon Guards were smashed into pieces. Even their godheads were shattered. Only one of them was lucky. His godhead escaped, but his godhead was still intact. Under Ji Tianqing's purposeful control, the explosion of the daylight sword was limited to a radius of 10 miles. Otherwise, the shock wave and sword essence from the explosion of the sword light would spread across a few thousand miles and affect many people. Not only would the people from the Xuanji Cave Heaven be affected, but the divine emperors from the 10,000 Demon Alliance would also be killed by the sword light. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing's control of power and laws had reached an extremely precise and subtle level. The Daylight Sword was able to kill or severely injure the 6 Golden Dragon Guards, but it wouldn't hurt the others. After the 6 Golden Dragon Guards were killed, Ji Ku, Yun Yao, Chao Qingyu and the others felt a lot less pressured. Ji Tianxing went after the Golden Dragon Guard commander, who ran away. In a flash, he caught up with the Godhead and destroyed it in 2 moves. The Godhead fragments and interspatial rings fell from the sky and were taken by him. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yun Yao, Ji Ku and the others quickly took divine elixirs to suppress their injuries. Not far away, a dozen Golden Dragon Guards captains and 2,000 divine emperors from the Xuanji Cave Heaven were dumbfounded. They were scared out of their wits. They originally had the upper hand. As long as they fought steadily, they would definitely win. However, the 6 Golden Dragon Guards captains were killed. The situation took a turn for the worse. Everyone began to panic. Their momentum immediately weakened. Even the power of their attacks was greatly reduced. Instead, it was the 1,000-odd divine lords from the Myriad Demon League that were previously at a disadvantage. They were suppressed and forced to retreat. Seeing the acting chief appear out of nowhere and kill several Golden Dragon Guard commanders in seconds, everyone's morale was greatly boosted and their blood was boiling. Their spirit and faith supported them, allowing them to erupt with even more ferocious fighting spirit and launch an intense counterattack. After a while, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and Yank also suppressed their injuries and recuperated their divine powers and auras. They charged into the battlefield once again and attacked the dozen captains of the Golden Dragon Guard. With their middle-level Divine King strength, dealing with those low-level Divine Kings could be said to be more than enough. After only a dozen moves, 2 Golden Dragon Guards were killed and 3 were severely injured. This caused the morale of both sides to rise and fall, and the situation was quickly reversed. As long as there were no accidents, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others would definitely win. At the same time, Ji Tianxing had already moved to another battlefield. Although his strength was close to that of a peak Divine King, if he joined the battle, he would definitely be able to kill a group of Divine Lords quickly. However, he didn't do so. It would take too much time and wouldn't change the situation much. As the commander of the Myriad Demon League, of course, he couldn't keep an eye on the Divine Lords of the Xuanji Grotto. His target was naturally the commanders and Divine Kings of the Xuanji Grotto. This was because he knew very well that the true winner of a war was always the strong. Only by killing the commanders and experts of the Xuanji Grotto could he secure victory. Swish! Ji Tianxing silently arrived at a battlefield and teleported behind a middle-level Divine King. This middle-level Divine King was a territorial lord under the command of the Xuanji Grotto. On the battlefield, there were 12 Divine Kings from the Xuanji Grotto leading more than 3,000 Divine Lords. Their opponents were the 3rd Elder, 4th Elder, and 5th Elder of the Myriad Demon League. There were a total of 10 Divine Kings and more than 1,000 Divine Lords. Before Ji Tianxing appeared, the Elders of the Myriad Demon League were severely injured. One of them even had his divine body destroyed, leaving him with only a godhead. However, his godhead had nowhere to go, so it attached itself to the 3rd Elder's body. The 1,000 divine lords of the Myriad Demon League were also severely injured. Their numbers were rapidly decreasing. However, after Ji Tianxing appeared, he instantly killed a territorial lord with a thunderous strike. The other divine kings from the Xuanji Grotto were all stunned by Ji Tianxing. They were stunned for a moment before they were filled with shock. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing performed a few more sword Dao techniques consecutively and killed a few more divine kings. Immediately, the experts and experts of the Xuanji Grotto were terrified. Their morale hit rock bottom. Meanwhile, the soldiers of the Myriad Demon League were greatly encouraged. Their morale soared. The situation immediately reversed. The Xuanji Grotto's side was forced to retreat, and the Myriad Demon League would definitely win. Thus, Ji Tianxing quietly left and rushed to the next battlefield. The next few battlefields all had similar situations. The soldiers of the Myriad Demon League were originally at a disadvantage. They had suffered heavy casualties and were in a very dangerous situation. However, after Ji Tianxing arrived and quickly killed a group of divine kings, the situation was reversed. The Xuanji Grotto's side was anxious and their morale was low. On the other hand, the morale of the Myriad Demon League's side was high. The soldiers' fighting spirit was high. Under this situation, the scales of victory continued to tilt towards the Myriad Demon League. About 15 minutes later, Ji Tianxing helped the 6 battlefields resolve the crisis. After turning the situation around, he went to help the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue and the others. At this time, everyone's injuries were even worse than before. Even though the 3 of them surrounded Xueshang, they were unable to hurt him. Instead, they were beaten to a miserable state by Xueshang. Their divine bodies were almost destroyed. They were extremely weak and had almost no strength to continue fighting. If not for the fact that Ji Tianxing was safe and sound and had defeated the Battle Dragon King, they would have lost their mental support. It was because they knew that Ji Tianxing was currently helping the other members of the League and would soon come to their aid that they could hold on until now. Otherwise, they would have given up resisting. Now that Ji Tianxing had finally made a move, they could finally see the light of day. They finally saw hope for victory. As for Xueshang, although he was in an invincible position and had not suffered any substantial injuries after fighting for so long, however, he had used up a lot of his divine power and was mentally exhausted. The left and right protectors and Hu Xinyue he faced were both peak 8th and 9th stage divine kings. They were not much weaker than him. If not for old ancestor Qiong Qi's indestructible golden body, he would not be a match for the 3 of them. On one hand, he was exhausted. At the same time, he was mentally and physically exhausted. Deep in his heart, he was anxious and worried. He already knew that Ji Tianxing was safe and sound and that the Battle Dragon King had escaped with serious injuries. Including Qin Yu being assassinated by Ji Tianxing, that was also something he saw on the spot. Of the 2 commanders of the Xuanji Grotto, one was dead and the other was injured. Other than him, no one could go against Ji Tianxing. However, due to the heavenly oath, he could not deal with Ji Tianxing. How could he not be anxious? Chapter 3781. Ji Tianxing appeared at the end of the Golden Dragon Mountain range and killed 2 godly kings with lightning speed. This immediately attracted the attention of a dozen godly kings. Even Xueshang looked over cautiously. The battle between Xueshang and the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue and the others stopped for a moment. Ji Tianxing no longer concealed himself. He appeared in the open and flew toward Xueshang and the others. He glanced at the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue and the others. Seeing that they were covered in wounds and looked like they were made of blood, his heart skipped a beat. "You guys retreat first. Leave this to me." Ji Tianxing flew across the sky with sword in hand. Under everyone's gaze, he flew toward Xueshang. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue, and the others hurriedly acknowledged the order. They retreated far away and consumed elixirs to suppress their injuries. When Ji Tianxing was 10,000 feet away from Xueshang, he stopped in the sky. The scene immediately quieted down. Whether it was the Myriad Demon Alliance or the Xuanji Grotto, they all looked at Ji Tianxing and Xueshang. It was common knowledge that the 2 of them were the strongest cultivators in the Xuanji Wonderland. In other words, the outcome of the battle was in their hands. The atmosphere was heavy. The experts and experts of the Xuanji Grotto had gloomy expressions. Even Xueshang's eyes were evasive. He did not dare to meet Ji Tianqing's eyes. His aura was weaker than before. Xueshang, Qin Yu is dead. The Battle Dragon King has escaped with heavy injuries. The Xuanji Grotto is leaderless. What are you still struggling for? Ji Tianqing looked at Xueshang with a stern expression and questioned him calmly. Xueshang frowned. Anxiety and helplessness flashed across his eyes. Indeed, the Xuanji Grotto was doomed. Unless the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor appeared, there was no way they could turn the tables. However, he knew that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor would not return anytime soon. Therefore, the Xuanji Grotto's defeat was inevitable. Ji Tianqing was right. No matter how he struggled, it was futile. Moreover, he was only temporarily relying on the Xuanji Grotto. He was not their subordinate. Since they were seeking refuge, they could give up and betray them at the crucial moment. If not for the fact that he was worried that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor would come after him, he would have fled long ago. Of course, if he were to escape, he would definitely do it quietly and would not make a fuss about it. Now that Ji Tianqing was being so overbearing in front of so many people, he couldn't possibly lower his head and admit defeat, much less run away. If he dared to abandon over 10,000 soldiers and escape alone, he would become the laughingstock of the entire Stellar Origin continent, the target of everyone's disdain and contempt. For the next tens of thousands of years, he would be nailed to the pillar of shame, unable to turn the tables. Therefore, he could only brace himself and say righteously, as the saying goes, a fine bird chooses a tree to nest in. Long Tian, you should understand this principle. I've always believed that the geniuses of the Enigma Grotto are the masters of this continent, and the Myriad Demon Alliance is not qualified. Since I've chosen to assist the Enigma Grotto Heaven, I'll stick to it until the end. I won't change my mind easily. When his voice spread across tens of thousands of li, the thousands of soldiers of the mysterious paradise all cheered and looked at him with admiration. Just now, these people were still worried that Xueshang would run away. With Xueshang's strength and methods, he had a chance to escape, but the thousands of soldiers were destined to die here. Now that they heard his impassioned declaration, the officers and soldiers felt reassured. Naturally, their morale was greatly boosted, and their fighting spirit was rekindled. Ji Tianqing furrowed his brows and sneered, "You've always been treacherous and two-faced. You're just putting on an act when you say those words. Don't forget your heavenly oath. With me here, you won't have a chance to make a move." Xueshang frowned and his face turned ugly. He was silent and seemed to be deep in thought. No one knew what he was thinking. Perhaps he was hesitating and weighing whether to give up or not. But at this moment, a deep and dignified male voice came from the distant ruins. "Long Tian, you wishful-thinking thief, you're too naive. Do you think that the position of the overlord of the Enigma Grotto Heaven is something you can easily shake?" The angry roar was like rolling thunder, reverberating between heaven and earth. It instantly woke up more than 10,000 people on the battlefield. Many people were familiar with this voice. They all looked to the north with surprise, disbelief, worry, and fear. Then, everyone saw a tall and sturdy figure, wrapped in a dazzling golden light, quickly fly into the sky above the battlefield. The figure shrouded in golden light was none other than the armored war dragon king. He had already changed into a new set of armor and helmet. The divine spear in his hand was also something no one had seen before. His face was very pale, and there were 2 hideous wounds on his cheek. But other than that, no one could see the injuries on his body, nor did they know how serious his injuries were. Everyone only felt that the Battle Dragon King was wrapped in a sacred golden light, and he looked extremely valiant and intimidating. Only experts like Ji Tianqing, the left and right protectors, and Xueshang could sense that the Battle Dragon King was indeed severely injured and very weak. He had purposely changed his armor and covered his body with golden light. It was just a bluff to hide his weakness. But this move was very effective against the soldiers of the Enigma Grotto Heaven. Seeing the heavily injured Battle Dragon King return to the battlefield majestically, the nearly 10,000 soldiers of the Enigma Grotto Heaven cheered in joy. It was just a heavily injured Battle Dragon King. Ji Tianxing naturally did not take it to heart. However, when his gaze landed behind the Battle Dragon King and saw two unfamiliar Godly King experts, he suddenly became vigilant. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue, and the experts of the Myriad Demon Alliance also stared at the two figures cautiously. The two mysterious experts of unknown origins had very distinct appearances. On the left was a skinny, golden-haired elder more than 10 feet tall. He wore a golden robe embroidered with silver starry patterns. His entire body was filled with a sacred and peaceful aura. Judging from this elder's appearance, his cheeks were long, and his chin and nose were very sharp. He seemed to have been transformed from a divine bird. As for the Godly King expert on the right, he was nearly 3 feet tall and his body was as sturdy as a small mountain. He had a flat face, a flat nose, a wide mouth, and rows of uneven fangs. From his appearance and the aura he emitted, Ji Tianxing could vaguely guess that he was from the sea race. Most importantly, these two Godly King experts of unknown origins were surrounded by formless divine law patterns. Their strength was unfathomable. Obviously, these two were peak 9th stage Godly Kings. They might even be peak Godly Kings. Realizing this, Ji Tianxing hurriedly sent a message to the left and right protectors. On the Star Source continent, other than the Old Alliance Master and the Golden Dragon Emperor, who else is a peak Godly King? The left and right protectors were stunned. They frowned and thought carefully for a moment. Suddenly, they thought of something and their expressions changed. Chapter 3782. Young Master, there are indeed two more peak Divine Kings on the Star Source continent. One is the old Divine King who was born in the ancient times and made his name 20,000 years ago, Patriarch Golden Rock. The other is a rising star in the recent 1,000 years, Divine King War Whale. The left and right protectors guessed the answer and hurriedly reported it to Ji Tianxing. Their tones were complicated, low, and filled with worry. After a moment of silence, the two seemed to be afraid that Ji Tianxing did not understand the situation, so they took the initiative to explain. The Golden Rock tribe has always been in the 9 mystical grotto heaven, far away from the secular world. Patriarch Golden Rock has not shown himself for 10,000 years and has always been in seclusion to cultivate. As for Divine King War Whale, he has been very active in the southern sea region of the continent for the past 1,000 years and has a high reputation. There is a sea region in the southern part of the continent that is the territory of the War Whale tribe. It is called the War Whale Sea Region. There is a blessed land that has been occupied by the War Whale tribe for 10,000 years. Divine King War Whale is the current leader of the War Whale tribe. He is extremely talented and obtained a fortuitous opportunity in the Southern Sea's bottomless ruins. That is how he became a peak Divine King and allowed the War Whale tribe to rise. After hearing the left and right protector's explanation, Ji Tianxing nodded slightly to show that he understood. At this time, War Dragon King spoke again. He looked down at everyone with a confident smile and said in a dignified tone, "Long Tian, and the rebels of the Myriad Demon Alliance, listen up. The two people standing behind me right now are the most respected experts on the continent. I believe many of you have already guessed. That's right, these two are Patriarch Golden Rock and Divine King War Whale. The mysterious Grotto Heaven is the overlord of the Star Source continent and the ruler of the continent. These two experts did not care about worldly affairs, but they could not bear to see war break out everywhere and the people suffer. That is why they acted to uphold justice and pacify the disaster. The rebels of the Myriad Demon Alliance should have been sentenced to death for committing such heinous crimes. None of them should be spared. However, His Majesty the Dragon Emperor is benevolent, and these two experts are also merciful and compassionate. They do not want to commit more crimes. As long as you surrender now and seal your divine power, I can spare your lives. I promise you that I will not kill the ordinary members of the Alliance. I will only kill the main culprit to warn the world." The Battle Dragon King's voice was full of vigor and confidence. It was as if he had the entire situation under his control. The facts were indeed so. With the assistance of two peak divine kings, the profound Paradise's victory was indeed in their grasp. Especially when he loudly announced the identities of the two peak divine kings, the 10,000 over people on the battlefield were all in an uproar. Everyone was stunned, their faces filled with astonishment. Then, everyone from the abstruse cave erupted in earth-shattering cheers. They were extremely excited. Everyone's face was brimming with joy and excitement from escaping death. The 6,000 members of the 10,000 Demon Alliance, on the other hand, were all overwhelmed with fear and desperation. They had never expected that this war would have so many twists and turns. The 10,000 Demon Alliance had just secured the victory and was about to claim it. Who would have thought that the mysterious Paradise would turn the tables in the end? This result was unacceptable to many people. Then, everyone heard the Battle Dragon King's declaration of surrender. The soldiers of the abstruse cave were naturally beside themselves with joy. They looked at their enemies with ridicule and pity, waiting to see the humiliating scene of them kneeling and begging to surrender. The 6,000 members of the 10,000 Demon Alliance were filled with grief and humiliation, but there was nothing they could do. Most of them refused to give up. They did not want to give up so easily, but they also did not want to be humiliated. They all looked at Ji Tianxing and the left and right protectors. As long as the acting alliance leader and the two protectors did not express their stance, they would not beg to surrender. However, there were still a few people who despaired. They thought that if they continued to resist, they would definitely die. Since that was the case, they might as well surrender and save their lives. At least the Battle Dragon King would not go back on his word. However, what made the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance anxious and uneasy was that Ji Tianxing was expressionless and did not react. He only secretly used his divine sense to send an order to the left and right protectors, take 1,000 men and rush to the exit of the mysterious Paradise. Kill everyone there and control the exit. The left and right protectors were stunned. They did not understand what he meant. They asked, "Young master, why are we controlling the exit now? What we need to deal with now are the two peak divine kings. Young master, are you going to fight to the death and break out of the encirclement?" Ji Tianxing did not even turn his head. He continued to explain, "Our reinforcements have arrived. Go control the exit and coordinate with the outside to bring them in." Reinforcements? What reinforcements? Who will come to help us? The left and right protectors were pleasantly surprised but also very confused. Ji Tianxing did not explain further. The two did not ask any more questions. They hurriedly led their men and left the battlefield. At this time, the two sides had already stopped fighting. They gathered into two groups and faced each other in the sky. Even when they saw the left and right protectors take 1,000 men away, the War Dragon King and Shueshang did not stop them. As for Forefather Golden Rock and God King Battle Whale, they were like divine objects, watching everything with indifferent expressions. After all, their identities were special. They only needed to stand there. They did not need to do anything to represent everything. Seeing the myriad demon alliance's silence, the War Dragon King was furious. He wanted to persuade them to surrender again. This time, his attitude was even fiercer. He would not be amicable. After all, his injuries were very serious. They had already damaged the foundation of his divine Tao. He only wanted to settle this matter as soon as possible so that he could go into seclusion to heal. However, before he could speak, Ji Tianxing stepped forward. He looked at the two peak divine kings and asked, "Divine King Battle Whale, although the South Sea Blessed Land is to the south of the continent, and the Myriad Demon Alliance is to the northwest of the continent, we do not have much interaction. However, I believe that there is no enmity between us. Now that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor is not here, why are you getting involved in this mess and showing your support for the mysterious paradise? Divine King Battle Whale, who was as sturdy as a mountain, had been looking down with an indifferent expression. Now, he opened his eyes wide and looked at Ji Tianqing with a frown. He exuded a sacred aura that struck fear in others. He was not angry. Instead, he said with a playful smile, "Indeed, I do not have much interaction with the Myriad Demon Alliance. However, the South Sea-blessed land and our Battle Whale tribe are indebted to the mysterious paradise for their help. Naturally, I have to return the favor. There are hundreds of divine kings and hundreds of first-rate factions on the continent. None of them dare to interfere. That is because they are too weak to participate. They are afraid that they will be implicated. However, the Battle Whale tribe and I do not have such concerns. We have the right to show our support. Long Tian, what do you think?" Since the other party had made it so clear, Ji Tianqing did not say anything more. He nodded slightly and turned his head to look at the Golden Rock ancestor. "Forefather Golden Rock, speaking of which, we have met once before. You are an old senior who does not care about worldly affairs. Why are you suddenly interfering?" Chapter 3783. Ji Tianqing looked at Forefather Golden Rock without a trace of hatred or killing intent. Even his tone was a little playful and puzzled. Many of the God Kings present frowned when they heard that. They became interested. Forefather Golden Rock was also stunned. He looked at Ji Tianqing for a while, and suddenly his golden eyebrows twitched as he recalled some old memories. "Oh, I remember now. Your Long Tian. That Long Tian, the last disciple of Dragon Emperor Feng Tian. More than 1,300 years ago, when Heavenly Dragon Emperor came to visit this old man, he brought you with him." Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and smiled. "That's right." The Golden Rock Patriarch stared at Ji Tianqing, his golden eyes filled with reminiscence and reminiscence. His tone was low and deep. "Sigh. Things change with the passage of time. The past is still vivid in my mind, but 1,000 years have passed in the blink of an eye. This old man still remembers, back then, Tianlong Emperor took great care of you and praised you greatly, and you were also heroic, confident, and arrogant. I didn't expect that Dragon Emperor Feng Tian had already passed away, and you've grown to such a level." Forefather Golden Rock stroked his golden beard, and his thin cheeks revealed an envious expression. "In terms of judging people and teaching according to their abilities, I'm indeed far inferior to Dragon Emperor Feng Tian." Seeing that Ji Tianqing and Forefather Golden Rock knew each other and were talking about old times in public, War Dragon King's expression was a little unpleasant. He was hesitating whether to remind Forefather Golden Rock not to act on his emotions. Forefather Golden Rock put away his reminiscence and said to Ji Tianqing, "Long Tian, although I'm good friends with your master and have some ties with you, this matter concerns the safety of this world. However, today's matter concerns the situation and safety of the entire Starsource continent. Please forgive this old man for not condoning or playing favorite. Xuanji Grotto Heaven was the rightful overlord of the Starsource continent, and had controlled the continent for more than 20,000 years. Although it had experienced many storms and twists and turns, it was generally peaceful. It was a time of peace and prosperity now. Billions of common people were able to live and work in peace, cultivate in peace, prolong their lives, and pursue the divine Tao. The foundation of the Myriad Demon Alliance was still shallow. It was unwise for them to start a war so recklessly to shake the Xuanji paradise. In the end, both sides would suffer great losses, and the stable situation of the Starsource continent would fall into chaos and danger. In the end, no one knew who would be able to unify the world and control the Starsource continent again. However, I am certain that during this process, the Starsource continent will definitely be embroiled in the flames of war that will last for countless years. In order to prevent the common people from suffering, I had no choice but to accept the War Dragon King's invitation and make a trip to the Enigma Paradise. Although Patriarch Golden Rock said that he did not care about old ties and that he could not be biased, he did not care. However, the only reason he was willing to explain in such detail was because of the sky-sealing Dragon Emperor. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was deep in thought, the Golden Rock Patriarch continued, Long Tian, listen to my advice. Give up. For the sake of the people in the world and the tens of thousands of members of the 10,000 Demon Alliance, you should retreat. I guarantee you with my reputation that no one will make things difficult for you. Of course, if the Golden Dragon Emperor wants to take revenge on you in the future, that's your problem. Many of the God Kings widened their eyes in shock when they heard that. The War Dragon King's expression changed drastically. He instinctively cried out, No! Absolutely not! He had long since made up his mind that no matter what, he would kill Ji Tianxing today and eliminate this great threat. In the end, the Golden Rock Patriarch still decided to be biased. He actually wanted to guarantee Ji Tianxing's safety. The War Dragon King was so angry that his liver hurt. He cursed in his heart, What a cunning old bastard! Not only do you want to win the good name of saving the common people, you also want to preserve the friendship of your old friends. Damned feathered beast! Of course, no matter how angry the War Dragon King was, he could only curse in his heart. On the surface, he did not dare to show any disrespect or anger. After all, he still needed the Golden Rock Patriarch to hold the fort. No one knew that Ji Tianxing's silence was not because he was thinking about the Golden Rock Patriarch's words. In fact, he was communicating with Peng Fei in the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda. Peng Fei, what is your relationship with the Golden Rock Patriarch? Peng Fei was cultivating in seclusion in the Divine Pagoda. He was caught off guard by Ji Tianxing's question. After calming down, he calmed himself down and replied, Young Master Long, didn't you ask this question a long time ago? I am a disciple of the Golden Rock tribe. Of course I am a descendant of the Golden Rock Patriarch. Ji Tianxing did not give up. He continued, All members of the Golden Rock tribe can be called descendants of the Golden Rock Patriarch. But what I want to ask is, are you and the Golden Rock Patriarch's direct descendants? What is your seniority? This. Peng Fei hesitated. He asked carefully, Sir, did something happen to you? Or have you gone to the 9 mystical cave heaven to hand me over to the Patriarch? Hearing his strange tone, Ji Tianxing knew there was hope. He explained, I am now the acting leader of the 10,000 Demon Alliance. I am leading an army to attack the mystical cave heaven. Just as we were about to win, the mystical cave heaven invited 2 peak divine kings to help. One of the peak divine kings is your family's ancestor. Ah! Peng Fei was dumbfounded. He was like a petrified statue. Fortunately, he had already stopped cultivating. Otherwise, his divine power would have been in chaos and he would have gone mad. After a long time, he finally recovered from the monstrous shock. But he still could not believe it. He asked with a trembling voice, Sir, you are not joking with me, right? You became the leader of the 10,000 Demon Alliance and led an army to attack the mystical cave heaven? And you're going to win? Oh my God, what happened to this world? Why did it become so strange and crazy? Ji Tianxing did not give Peng Fei time to calm down and digest the information. He asked, Peng Fei, can you persuade the Golden Rock Patriarch not to get involved in this mess? Don't say you can't do it. If you really can't do it, then I can only fight back and kill him and that divine king war whale together. What? Peng Fei, who still hadn't calmed down, was once again scared out of his wits when he heard this. His entire person was somewhat dazed. Sir, you are also a peak divine king? How is this possible? Why didn't I see it before? Could it be that you have been hiding your strength? In a short time, he was forced to accept too much information. It was too shocking. Peng Fei was already incoherent. Ji Tianxing still did not explain. He said in a calm and dignified tone, "The situation is urgent. I don't have time to explain it to you. I will give you 10 breaths of time to think. Can you persuade your patriarch to give up on this matter?" 10, 9, 8, 7. Ping Fei panted heavily and forced himself to calm down. When Ji Tianxing shouted 3, he finally made an impulsive decision. "Sir, let me try." Chapter 3784. Let you try. Ping Fei's somewhat unconfident voice made Ji Tianxing frown. Now that the two armies are facing each other, the decisive battle is about to start. Moreover, everyone on the battlefield is a God King powerhouse. If you don't have the confidence, then don't take the risk. Although Ji Tianxing wanted Ping Fei to help him take care of Forefather Golden Rock, this powerful enemy, without using force, he did not want to force Ping Fei to do so. However, he didn't want to force Ping Fei to do this in order to avoid bringing disaster to Ping Fei. At most, he would go all out and use all his trump cards and ultimate skills to fight the two great peak god kings. However, after Ping Fei was silent for a moment, he said in a low and complicated tone, "I should still have 60 to 70% confidence. After all, I'm a direct descendant of the forefather. According to seniority, he's my grandfather's great-grandfather." Without a doubt, now that things had developed to this extent, Ping Fei finally revealed the truth. This was his identity secret. It had never been exposed before. Ji Tianxing was also full of surprise. He said with a light smile, "Haha, I already guessed that you shouldn't be an ordinary Golden Rock descendant. I didn't expect it to be so. In that case, the Golden Rock race's current patriarch is your grandfather?" Ping Fei's emotions were somewhat complicated. He answered in a muffled voice. It was unknown what he was worried about. Ji Tianxing comforted him. "Don't worry too much. I have some relationship with your forefather. He already protected me in front of everyone just now. However, just protecting him a little is not enough. I have to remove him from this matter. Now, it's up to your performance." Finishing, he opened the spatial passage to the divine pagoda. Ping Fei's thoughts were still somewhat chaotic. Before he could adjust his mood and state, he was sent into the sky and exposed to everyone's attention. Swoosh! Ping Fei, dressed in a golden robe, appeared beside Ji Tianxing with a bitter and complicated expression. He instantly became everyone's focus. King War Dragon, Forefather Golden Rock, and Divine King War Whale all stared at Ji Tianxing. More than 10,000 people on the battlefield were also waiting for his decision to surrender or resist. But right at this moment, a golden-robed young man suddenly appeared beside him. Many people originally thought that this was Ji Tianxing's trump card, and that it was definitely a peak God King powerhouse. When everyone saw through that Ping Fei only had peak Divine Lord strength, their faces were immediately full of astonishment. What's going on? What does he mean? Who is that golden-robed youth? Why do I feel that the golden-robed kid's appearance and temperament are a little similar to Patriarch Golden Rock? What does Long Tian want? Do you want to fight or surrender? Give me a quick answer." Many god kings and thousands of god lords looked at Ji Tianxing and Ping Fei in confusion. Only Emperor Battle Dragon, Forefather Golden Peng, Divine Emperor Battle Whale, Hu Xinyue and the others realized something was amiss. This was especially true for Patriarch Golden Rock. Although he appeared calm on the surface, he had already understood something. He frowned slightly and looked meaningfully at Ping Fei. Then, he stared at Ji Tianxing and sent a voice transmission. "Little guy, you're a little shameless. You're not as arrogant as before." Ji Tianxing bowed slightly and sent a voice transmission back. "Senior, I had no choice. Please forgive me." Patriarch Golden Rock didn't say anything else, but he sighed in his heart. He felt a little bitter. He had already guessed what Ping Fei wanted to do, so he felt helpless. At this moment, Emperor Battle Dragon and Divine Emperor Battle Whale looked at Peng Fei and then at Patriarch Golden Rock. Their eyes flickered as they vaguely guessed something. Divine Emperor Battle Whale was still calm, but Emperor Battle Dragon's eyes were already showing anger. Just as the experts were speaking in riddles and maintaining their silence, while the 10,000 overseer gods were confused, Peng Fei finally spoke. He had also been shocked by such a huge lineup, but he quickly calmed down. He ignored the 10,000 god lords and only stared at Patriarch Golden Rock as he walked over step by step. There was no doubt that 10,000 pairs of eyes were staring at him. Their gazes were filled with doubt, disdain, hatred, and all sorts of other emotions. It made him feel extremely pressured. With every step he took, he felt as if he was walking on a mountain that was tens of thousands of meters tall. After a dozen steps, he was drenched in cold sweat. Even so, he gritted his teeth and walked slowly toward Patriarch Golden Rock. The distance between the two of them was clearly only 100,000 feet, but he had to walk for a full quarter of an hour before arriving. When he stopped in front of Patriarch Golden Rock, he was only 10 steps away. Emperor Battle Dragon and Divine Emperor Battle Whale's invisible aura had already made him tremble. His face was pale. Fortunately, Patriarch Golden Rock secretly released his aura to protect him, helping him to resist the pressure of the two top experts. Disciple Peng Fei greets Patriarch. Peng Fei knelt down solemnly and kowtowed to Patriarch Golden Rock. His posture was extremely respectful. Patriarch Golden Rock looked at him deeply. There was no anger or disappointment in his eyes. Instead, there was a flash of relief. After all, this great-great-grandson of his was only a god lord, but he was able to remain calm in such a situation without losing his composure. It was clear that he was very determined. Yes, he was a talent with potential. He had a successor. What is it? Patriarch Golden Rock nodded slightly and used invisible divine power to help Peng Fei stand up. He asked calmly. Peng Fei bowed and said calmly, Patriarch, a senior once taught me that everything has its ups and downs, and that everything has its ups and downs. Heaven and earth have its Tao, and life and death are all reincarnations. You live in seclusion and only ask the will of the heavens, not the mundane world. Therefore, you leave the affairs of the world to the people of the world. I only wish to accompany you home and continue to listen to the will of the heavens. It was a simple sentence, but it explained the cycle of life and death in the mundane world, as well as the merciless principle of reincarnation. Divine Emperor Battle Whale narrowed his eyes and looked deeply at Peng Fei. Battle Dragon King's expression changed drastically, and he glared sharply at Peng Fei. All of this fell into Patriarch Golden Rock's eyes. Patriarch Golden Rock nodded and glanced at Ji Tianxing. He frowned and thought for a moment, then suddenly smiled. Ha, the senior you speak of is indeed a great power who has not appeared in the world. He can already understand the will of the heavens, and is likely not far from surpassing the Divine King realm. That senior has seen through everything, and it is this old man who has fallen into a disadvantage. Forget it, this old man is not of the world to begin with, so why should I care about the affairs of the world? The first sentence was directed at Peng Fei, but the last two sentences sounded like he was talking to himself. When he finished, Patriarch Golden Rock smiled in relief. He flung his sleeves and left with Peng Fei. Battle Dragon King and Divine Emperor Battle Whale were left to the side without even a word of explanation. This scene made more than 10,000 people in the field dumbfounded. They were all stunned on the spot. He's gone just like that? Of course, no one knew what Patriarch Golden Rock's true thoughts were, or how much of what he said was true. Or perhaps he left without an explanation because he didn't know how to. But all of this, who could prove it? Chapter 3785. Forefather Golden Rock. Wait. Seeing that Forefather Golden Rock had already flown thousands of miles away, Battle Dragon King finally regained his senses and hurriedly chased after him. Forefather Golden Rock paused in midair with Pring Fei and turned to look at Battle Dragon King. Battle Whale, Xue Shang, Ji Tianxing, Hu Xinyue, and the others all remained where they were, watching them from afar. Everyone knew that Battle Dragon King had finally found a life-saving straw, a trump card to turn the tables. How could he give it up so easily? However, the crux of the matter was what Battle Dragon King had to say. Battle Dragon King stopped in front of Forefather Golden Rock and frowned. Forefather Golden Rock, I know that you've been in seclusion, focused on cultivating your divine Tao. However, the world is in chaos now, and the traitors of the Myriad Demon Alliance want to wreak havoc on the continent. Since you've already come to Xuanji Grotto Heaven, you should kill these traitors for the sake of His Majesty Dragon Emperor. However, you've just left without a proper explanation. You're not giving His Majesty Dragon Emperor any face. I hope you won't be blinded by these traitors and uphold justice for the world. Although Forefather Golden Rock was a peak divine king, he had always kept a low profile, and his personality was honest and gentle. Battle Dragon King had Xuanji Grotto Heaven as his backer, and his status was noble, so he did not have much respect for Forefather Golden Rock. With such accusations, there was even a hidden threat in his words. His meaning was simple. Forefather Golden Rock had left today, but His Majesty Dragon Emperor would definitely punish him when he returned. 9 Mystical Grotto Heaven would definitely suffer. At first, Forefather Golden Rock had felt guilty and guilty. Now that he saw the War Dragon King's unyielding attitude, the guilt in his heart disappeared without a trace. He bowed slightly to the Battle Dragon King and said calmly without any anger, "Battle Dragon King, this old man didn't think it through and accepted your invitation to come here. Now that I've thought it through, I want to leave again. This is indeed this old man's fault. This old man apologizes to you. However, there are some things that I must clarify in front of everyone today. I've stayed away from worldly affairs for 20,000 years, not because I'm afraid of anyone, but because I've always admired the great Tao. I'm willing to come to the Enigma Grotto, not because I'm giving anyone face, but because I don't want to see the common people suffer. I want to use my meager strength to turn things around. But I've thought it through now. Everything in the world has a cycle of cause and effect. The heavenly Tao is fair, and it's absolutely not something that we can interfere with. As for the justice and the country that you speak of, other than the heavenly Tao, who else can represent justice in this world? Neither the Xuanji Grotto nor the Myriad Demon Alliance could represent them. Therefore, this old man has understood and decided to stay out of this matter and allow the will of the heavens to arrange it. I will not go against the will of the heavens." After saying that, the Golden Rock ancestor calmly looked at the Battle Dragon King and asked, "Battle Dragon King, do you understand what I mean?" Everyone present, as long as they weren't idiots, understood. Patriarch Golden Rock just didn't want to meddle in other people's business. As for the talk about justice and the heavenly Tao, it was just to leave some face for everyone. The Enigma Grotto Heaven used to be the overlord of the Star Source continent, representing justice and the country. However, this did not mean that the Xuanji Grotto would always be the overlord, nor would it always be righteous. Everything in the world would rise and fall, and so would the rise and fall of a dynasty. If the Myriad Demon Alliance destroyed the Enigma Grotto and replaced it, then the Myriad Demon Alliance would be righteous and the country. On the other hand, if the Myriad Demon Alliance failed, then they would be rebels, and the Enigma Grotto would still be the overlord. In short, the winner was king and the loser was in the wrong. Whoever won was right. This was the will of the heavens. No one could refute this kind of hooliganism. Moreover, it was easy to understand, and more than 10,000 people present agreed. However, War Dragon King was furious. He pointed at Golden Rock Grand Elder and shouted, "You! What a sharp tongue you have! How dare you distort the truth with your words? Very well, Patriarch Golden Rock. You must remember what you did today, and when His Majesty the Dragon Emperor returns, He will make you regret it. This was already a blatant threat. God King Warwhale, Shueshang, and many other God Kings from the Enigma Grotto were anxious. Oh, Battle Dragon King, no matter how angry you are, you should hold it in. You can't fall out with the Golden Rock Ancestor. The Golden Rock Ancestor is obviously protecting the Myriad Demon Alliance and Long Tian, and you're threatening him to his face. If he's forced to help the Myriad Demon Alliance, won't we be doomed? Similar thoughts flashed through the minds of everyone present. The Golden Rock Ancestor was not angry at all. He still looked kind and amiable. However, his slightly stooped body straightened up. His murky golden eyes became clear as he looked at the Battle Dragon King. He said in a dignified tone, "The Golden Rock Tribe does not take the initiative to cause trouble, but we are not afraid of it either." After saying that, he ignored the Battle Dragon King and left with Peng Fei. Whoosh! Under everyone's gaze, the grandfather-grandson pair gradually disappeared into the distance. When they were hundreds of thousands of miles away, no one could see them, and not even divine consciousness could detect them. They were not far from the exit of the Enigma Grotto. At this moment, the grandfather-grandson pair saw a large group of figures flying in the sky from the direction of the exit. These figures were as fast as streaks of light. There were more than 30 of them, and they looked like a dark cloud. The Golden Rock Ancestor frowned slightly as he glanced at them. He could tell at a glance that they were all godly kings. When he saw their clothes, he realized that they were not from the Enigma Grotto. They seemed to be from the Myriad Demon Alliance. Only then did he relax. The godly kings naturally saw the Golden Rock Ancestor and Peng Fei. They were all on high alert, and they gripped their divine weapons tightly. However, 2 of the 3 elders in the lead were injured 9th-layer godly kings. They were the left and right protectors. They sized up the Golden Rock Ancestor and Peng Fei, then said something to the godly kings behind them. As a result, the godly kings let down their guard and changed their direction slightly. They brushed past the Golden Rock Ancestor and Peng Fei. The 2 sides did not stop, nor did they communicate. Their figures quickly disappeared into the horizon. About half an hour later, the Golden Rock Ancestor and Peng Fei arrived at the exit of the Enigma Grotto. At this moment, they saw that the God Stone array near the exit had been destroyed. The area within 10,000 miles was in ruins. In the ruins, they could vaguely see the corpses of the Golden Dragon Guards. There were 10 godly kings from the Myriad Demon Alliance and more than 600 godly monarchs guarding the exit. Peng Fei was taken aback when he saw this. Then, he smiled in relief. He already had an answer in his heart. The outcome of this battle was already decided. The Myriad Demon Alliance was bound to win. When the Golden Rock Ancestor and Peng Fei approached the exit, the Myriad Demon Alliance experts guarding the exit immediately became alert. 6 godly kings led dozens of godly monarchs. They held divine weapons and surrounded them warily. Chapter 3786. Before the left and right protectors left, they had ordered them to guard the exit of Xuanji Grotto Heaven. They were not to let anyone enter or leave. If anyone from Xuanji Grotto Heaven approached, they were to kill them. However, Old Ancestor Golden Rock and Peng Fei approached him openly without any strange expressions. Their clothes were neat and tidy, and there were no signs of battle. They did not seem to be from Xuanji Grotto Heaven. The godly kings could not make up their minds. They decided to ask about their identities first before attacking. Fortunately, Peng Fei was quick-witted. Seeing that everyone was on guard, he took the initiative to speak. "Brothers from the Myriad Demon Alliance, I am Peng Fei, young Master Long Tian's friend. This person beside me is the Master of 9 Mystical Grotto Heaven, the forefather of our Golden Rock clan. We are friends, not enemies. Don't be nervous." Hearing his explanation, the godly kings secretly heaved a sigh of relief. They did not completely believe Peng Fei, but they relaxed and bowed with a smile. After bowing, the leading godly king said respectfully, "So it's forefather Golden Rock and young Master Peng Fei. We have been disrespectful. Greetings, Forefather Golden Rock. Please forgive us, Senior. We have a mission and orders, so we need you to prove your identity. We will ask for instructions from our superiors. Forefather Golden Rock was still amiable. He did not say much. He only raised his hand and released a beam of golden light. Whoosh! The sacred golden light in his hand immediately condensed into the image of a golden-winged rock. It was lifelike and had unparalleled divine might. A powerful and sacred aura belonging to a peak godly king immediately spread out. Around Forefather Golden Rock, hundreds of Taoist rhymes and divine runes of law danced. It was terrifying. The leading middle-aged godly king was a 7th-degree godly king. He was naturally knowledgeable. Based on Forefather Golden Rock's move, he could confirm that Forefather Golden Rock was definitely a peak godly king. In the entire Starsource continent, the number of known peak godly kings could be counted on one hand. Without a doubt, even if this kind-looking golden-haired elder was not Forefather Golden Rock, he was an expert that the Myriad Demon Alliance did not want to offend. Thus, the middle-aged God King hurriedly bowed and apologized, and sent a message to the left and right protectors for instructions. Not long after, the left and right protectors sent a reply, ordering them to let them pass. The God Kings did not dare to delay. After apologizing to Forefather Golden Rock, they hurriedly opened the exit. Old Ancestor Golden Rock nodded slightly and hurriedly left Xuanji Grotto with Pring Fei. Shua! With a flash of white light, Patriarch Golden Rock and Pring Fei appeared at the peak of Sky Crane Mountain, standing above the sea of clouds. There was not a single soul in the surrounding tens of thousands of miles. It was very quiet. Patriarch Golden Rock was not in a hurry to leave. He turned his head to look at Pring Fei beside him with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Pring Fei, how did you get to know Long Tian? Patriarch Golden Rock had always felt that this matter was very strange. Could this be the will of the heavens? Or perhaps, Long Tian's scheming mind was deep, and he had long predicted today's situation, so he tried his best to get close to Pring Fei? Pring Fei was very smart. Looking at the ancestor's reaction, he guessed that the ancestor had some suspicions. Thus, he hurriedly recounted the process of him and Long Tian getting to know each other in detail. After hearing this, Patriarch Golden Rock was relieved and said with some emotion, "It seems that this is really the will of the heavens." Pring Fei also nodded in agreement and said with a smile, "What the ancestor did today is also in accordance with the will of the heavens. Our clan will definitely be blessed in the future." Patriarch Golden Rock raised his eyebrows and said with interest, "Oh? What do you mean?" Pring Fei did not hide and said with a smile, "Ancestor, Long Tian once told me that he promised in the name of the Heavenly Dragon Emperor that if the Myriad Demon Alliance controls the Starsource continent, as long as the 9 Mystical Grotto does not rebel in the future, he will protect the 9 Mystical Grotto forever." Patriarch Golden Rock was stunned for a moment, and a trace of gentleness flashed in his eyes. On account of the Heavenly Dragon Emperor's kindness, he let the Myriad Demon Alliance off today. And Long Tian was grateful for this favor and also made a promise to the 9 Mystical Grotto. This was what it meant to return the favor. Compared to the arrogant War Dragon King, who knew how much better he was. Then, Patriarch Golden Rock smiled and said earnestly to Pring Fei, "You have to remember that it is important to be kind to others and form good karma. But if you want to be worry-free, you have to rely on yourself." Pring Fei hurriedly nodded and said with a smile, "I will remember the ancestors' teachings." Patriarch Golden Rock thought for a moment and said with a playful tone, "I am going to return to the 9 Mystical Grotto now. Do you want to go back with me or stay here and wait for Long Tian?" Pring Fei's eyes widened in surprise and disbelief. Originally, he had planned to follow the ancestor back to the 9 Mystical Grotto today. Although he would lose his freedom and become a bird in a cage again, he was satisfied to be able to help Long Tian so much. But now, the ancestor had guessed his thoughts and allowed him to not return to the 9 mystical grotto. This simply made him overjoyed and excited. "Ancestor, can I really not go back?" Pring Fei asked with a heart full of surprise. Patriarch Golden Rock smiled kindly and said calmly, "Actually, not long after you ran away from home, I found out. You felt wronged in your heart, or you wanted to change your illusion realm and cultivation method. These are all fine. I can understand, and I am also willing to see some of the disciples in the clan have their own thoughts and changes. Instead of blindly following the past and blindly believing in the experiences of the seniors, you lose your own considerations." Patriarch Golden Rock's tone was very kind, and he even had a gratified smile. When Pring Fei heard this, it was as if there was a thunderclap in his head. He was stunned. He was stunned on the spot and only came back to his senses after a long time. His eyes were slightly red and he almost cried. Back then, he had run away from home and almost betrayed the Golden Rock clan, but he was not punished by the clan. Not only was he not caught and brought back to the 9 mystical grotto for trial, the clan even used their connections to ask 2 godly king experts to secretly take care of him. He did not understand the reason and thought that the clan leader's grandfather had found his conscience and deliberately arranged this. Now, he understood that the ancestor had paid attention to this matter and tacitly approved of his decision. "Ancestor, thank." Pring Fei endured the bitterness in his heart and was about to bow and thank the ancestor. Patriarch Golden Rock waved his hand and continued, "Don't blame your grandfather. He is the clan leader and shouldered the safety and future of 20,000 people. He has no choice. Also, don't belittle yourself and lose confidence. Cultivating the divine way is not something that can be determined in 100 or 1,000 years. Since ancient times, who knows how many godly king experts have been mediocre in the first half of their lives, only to shine in the end. Therefore, don't be concerned about your current strengths and weaknesses. You need to stick to your heart, learn to think, and find the divine way that suits you." At this point, Patriarch Golden Rock put his hands behind his back and looked up at the sky. His voice was deep and distant. "I have always believed that every child is like a star in the sky. They all have their own shining light." Chapter 3787. Inside the Xuanji Grotto Heaven, near the dilapidated Golden Dragon Mountain Range, more than 10,000 god lords were engaged in a fierce battle. After Patriarch Golden Rock left, the furious War Dragon King ordered the soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto Heaven to kill the Myriad Demon League. He was so anxious because he was afraid of Ji Tianqing's thoughts and methods. Originally, they were in a good situation, but they didn't expect Ji Tianqing to come up with a disciple of the Golden Rock clan and trick the Golden Rock old ancestor away with just a few words. War Dragon King was anxious and angry that he had lost a strong ally. He was afraid that if he delayed any longer, Ji Tianqing wouldn't surrender and would use some tricks to trick God King Battle Whale. God King Battle Whale should be more loyal to the Xuanji Grotto Heaven than Patriarch Golden Rock. However, War Dragon King couldn't guarantee that God King Battle Whale wouldn't change his mind at such a critical moment. What if Ji Tianqing used some tricks to form an alliance with God King Battle Whale and split the world? That would be a tragedy for the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. To avoid any complications, War Dragon King decided to end the battle quickly. Therefore, more than 70 God Kings led more than 10,000 divine lords to attack the 6,000 members of the Myriad Demon League. Under War Dragon King's arrangement, God King Battle Whale fought the strongest member of the Myriad Demon League, acting leader Long Tian. He and Xue Shang worked together to deal with the elders of the Myriad Demon League. A dozen Golden Dragon Guard commanders surrounded the Myriad Demon League's branch leaders and heavenly kings. The 16,000-plus Divine Lord experts from both sides were also divided into 2 battlefields and engaged in a fierce battle in the sky. Everyone knew that this was the final battle. The outcome of this battle would determine each other's fate and who would become the overlord of the Star Source continent. Would they reach the peak of glory and control the Star Source continent? Or would they be beaten into the dust and become the humiliating loser? It all depended on the outcome of this battle. Therefore, no one held back anymore. They used all their divine powers and ultimate skills and fought bravely. Endless light and shadows of divine spells filled the area within a radius of 50,000 miles, causing the entire area to be in chaos. Amidst the dazzling divine light, earth-shattering explosions erupted one after another, shaking the universe. Violent shockwaves that carried fragments of divine light, pieces of flesh, corpses, and the remains of divine artifacts swept across the battlefield and scattered in the ruins that stretched for tens of thousands of miles. Every minute and every second, many divine Lord Masters were killed. Their heads were separated from their bodies, their bones shattered, or they were turned into a rain of blood. Angry roars, hysterical shouts, and shrill screams could be heard all over the place. This battlefield had already transformed into the most ferocious and bloody battlefield. But what was most terrifying was not the battlefield of the Divine Lord experts, but the battlefield of the top experts. High up in the sky, Battle Dragon King and Shueshang had joined forces to fight Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying, Bai Feng, and the others. The shock waves from the battle tore the sky apart, revealing cracks in the void. The War Dragon King was heavily injured and weak. He was only in charge of assisting and protecting himself. The main attacker was naturally Blood Death. With the protection of the indestructible golden body, he attacked Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying, Bai Feng, and the others aggressively and had the absolute advantage. Before Ancestral Patriarch Golden Rock and Supreme Being Battle Whale appeared, he was still a little hesitant and wavering. But after the two top Divine Kings appeared, he made up his mind and stood firm. So, at this moment, he was extremely brave and domineering, beating Hu Xinyue, Bai Feng, and the others badly. On the other side, 80,000 miles away from the battlefield, Ji Tianxing and Supreme Being Battle Whale were fighting fiercely high up in the sky. As the most powerful cultivators of both forces, they were of course the key to the outcome of this battle. Both of them did not hold back and used their full strength, using all kinds of trump cards and ultimate skills. The War Whale Deity King revealed his true form, which was 100 miles long black war whale. His entire body was shrouded in icy blue light. It opened its mouth wide and spat out waves of divine light. The divine light transformed into thousands of divine light shadows and blasted towards Ji Tianxing. He also released invisible law divine runes and a weak Taoist rhyme to seal off a radius of 50,000 miles, suppressing Ji Tianxing. The so-called Taoist rhyme was the power of the heavenly way that a peak divine king could comprehend, the heavenly way. The end of the cultivation of the divine way was to merge with the heavenly way, comprehend and control the power of the heavenly way. If a peak divine king could completely control the complete heavenly way law and the power of the heavenly way, he would surpass the divine king realm and take the final step to enter the God Emperor realm. A peak divine king who had mastered the Taoist rhyme had a natural advantage over a divine king like Ji Tianxing who had not mastered the Taoist rhyme. Fortunately, Supreme Being Battle Whale had only cultivated for a short time and had only been a peak divine king for a few hundred years. Compared to an old monster like Ancestral Patriarch Golden Rock, his Taoist rhyme was obviously much weaker. Even if his Taoist rhyme could suppress Ji Tianxing, it was not fatal and could not achieve the effect of crushing. After all, Ji Tianxing was also a peak divine king who had mastered the Taoist rhyme in his previous life. Back then, Kenshin's comprehension of the heavenly way was deeper than Supreme Being Battle Whale's. The Taoist rhyme that he had mastered was much thicker than Supreme Being Battle Whale's. Ji Tianxing had enough experience to know how to avoid Supreme Being Battle Whale's Taoist rhyme and weaken the suppression of the Taoist rhyme to the greatest extent. Moreover, he had the primordial chaos spell in his hands. Under his control, the primordial chaos bell transformed and reformed into a pitch-black armor that wrapped around his body and protected him firmly. The divine bell even released a majestic power of law to resist Supreme Being Battle Whale's suppression and sealed off the area within a radius of 50,000 miles. On this battlefield, he was suppressed by Supreme Being Battle Whale and could not teleport. However, Supreme Being Battle Whale was also suppressed by the Divine Bell and could not use spatial transference. Therefore, the battle between the two of them was exceptionally fierce and desperate. It was almost a head-on clash that was difficult to dodge and avoid. Although Supreme Being Battle Whale was stronger and had mastered the Taoist rhyme, he did not have a Supreme Grade King Grade Divine artifact. On the other hand, Ji Tianxing was slightly weaker, but he had a lot of experience and had the primordial chaos bell. The two of them exchanged over 1,000 moves high up in the sky, but there was no clear victor. Each of them had their own merit. However, God King Warwol's mind was calm and collected. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, looked solemn and anxious. Supreme Being Battle Whale could stall for time, but he could not. He had to end the battle as soon as possible. This was because Xuanji Grotto Heaven had the upper hand and was suppressing the Myriad Demon Alliance. The number of people on both sides was decreasing, but the Myriad Demon Alliance's casualties were more severe. If they delayed for another hour, the Myriad Demon Alliance would definitely lose. At this point, Xuanji Grotto Heaven had more than 8,000 people left, while the Myriad Demon Alliance only had about 4,000 people left. From Hu Xinyue and Ao Jinying to a few thousand divine lords, they were all filled with grief and despair. Fortunately, just as the two sides were fighting fiercely, a dark cloud, flashing with divine light, rushed over from afar and joined the battle. That dark cloud was formed by more than 30 Supreme Being experts. The three leading elders were the left and right protectors and the chief of internal affairs. The reinforcements of the Myriad Demon Alliance had finally arrived. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3788. The left and right protectors and the head of internal affairs, Fu Ergu, led more than 30 God King experts into the battlefield. Without needing anyone to give them orders, they split into two groups and joined the two teams from the Demon League. Although the number of reinforcements was small, there were only about 30 of them. But they were all God King experts and could fight against 100 people. When they joined the battle, the situation changed immediately. Divine light flashed across the sky. Divine light covered the sky and poured down on the people from the Xuanji Grotto. In less than 100 breaths, more than 1,000 monarch god experts died under the swords of the God King experts. The Demon League's army that was retreating immediately regained their footing and had a chance to catch their breath. The Xuanji Grotto's army that was in high spirits had their attacks stopped and their arrogance quickly weakened. The situation quickly became balanced and the two sides were evenly matched. Especially Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying and a few elders, they had been suppressed by Xue Shang and War Dragon King and were on the verge of collapse and death. Now that the head of internal affairs had joined the battle, the pressure on them was greatly reduced. Everyone finally had a chance to catch their breath, and quickly took the chance to consume some divine pills to suppress their injuries and recover their divine power. The head of internal affairs, Fu Ergu, had always kept a low profile and very few people had seen him fight. For the past few hundred years, he had been in the Demon City, controlling the internal affairs of the Demon League and handling all kinds of important matters. There was a rumor in the Demon City that he was the second strongest expert in the Demon League and his strength was second only to League Master Luoho. He was stronger than the left and right protectors. But this rumor had not been confirmed and many people were skeptical. Until now, when everyone saw him fighting Xue Shang and suppressing War Dragon King, they finally believed the rumor. Fu Ergu's super strong combat power was not that of an ordinary Ninth Heaven Realm God King, but an expert that was very close to the peak God King realm. If it was not for Xue Shang's immortal golden body, he would not be Fu Ergu's opponent in his weakened state. Even so, Fu Ergu was still able to fight Shueshang to a draw and suppress War Dragon King, forcing him to retreat continuously. Therefore, the thousands of soldiers from the Demon League respected Fu Ergu even more. Everyone was more confident in the victory of this battle. Hu Xinyue and Ao Jinying retreated to the edge of the battlefield. After consuming the divine pills, they circulated their energy and discussed with each other. Previously, when the two protectors said that our reinforcements had arrived, young master asked them to receive them. I didn't believe them. At that time, I was still thinking that we were already at the end of our rope. Where would we find reinforcements? I didn't expect the reinforcements to be Sir. That's right. This is simply too unexpected, even we didn't expect it. But weren't Lord Steward and those consecrators, hall masters, and branch masters under orders to guard the headquarters of Myriad Demon City? Why would they leave the Demon City and come to the Xuanji Grotto to help? Of them, if they all left, wouldn't the current 1,000 Demon City be an empty city? That's of our demons of heaven's sects Irafes of Lords sect, reinforcements of Lords. This rain reinforcements, this Lord of Lord. Since it's young master's arrangement, he must be confident. Ao Jinying frowned and thought for a while. Then, he smiled and nodded in agreement. That's right. Previously, Lord asked the head to guard the Demon League to prevent an attack from Xuanji Grotto, in case our headquarters is destroyed. But now we've entered Xuanji Grotto and destroyed the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's divine palace. I guess Xuanji Grotto doesn't have any more trump cards and forces to attack the Demon League. Since the Demon League is safe, of course the head and his colleagues have to come to Xuanji Grotto to help. Only then can our league win. It will take at least 2 to 3 days to reach Xuanji Grotto from the Demon League. In that case, young master had already predicted this outcome and informed Sir Supervisor in advance. So, everything is within Lord's expectations. Lord's foresight is amazing. I'm impressed. Hu Xinyue and Ao Jinying were both smart people. After a short discussion, they guessed the whole story and understood the reason behind it. Because of this, they admired and respected Ji Tianxing even more. After a while, their injuries stabilized and their divine power recovered. They were about to return to the battlefield and attack Shueshang and the War Dragon King. But the head of internal affairs, Fu Ergu, ordered, "Don't come. Leave these two to me. You two go and help everyone kill the Xuanji Grotto soldiers as soon as possible." Hu Xinyue and Ao Jinying thought for a while and quickly replied, "Yes, Lord." Then, the two of them charged into the battlefield, killing the Golden Dragon Guards and Sir God experts. They were well aware that the Chief of Internal Affairs' words were very reasonable. Even if they joined forces with the head of Internal Affairs to attack the War Dragon King and Shueshang, it would not be of much use. It would be better to let the head of Internal Affairs hold back the War Dragon King and Shueshang while they went to kill the Golden Dragon Guards and Sir Gods of Xuanji Grotto. This would be more helpful to the battle. The facts proved that the Demon League's strategy was correct. While the War Dragon King and Shueshang were held back by the head of Internal Affairs, the Demon League had more God Kings than the Xuanji Grotto. On the two battlefields, the Demon League quickly gained the upper hand and completely suppressed the Xuanji Grotto. As time passed, the Xuanji Grotto's God Kings dwindled and their Sir God experts were slaughtered. An hour later, the Xuanji Grotto's Sir God experts were only left with about 3,000. 2 hours later, the Xuanji Grotto's side was left with about 1,000 people and about 20 God Kings. On the other hand, the Demon League still had about 50 God Kings and 3,000 Sir God expert. Now that the situation had developed to this point, the Xuanji Grotto's defeat was inevitable. Moreover, the head of Internal Affairs had sacrificed 500 years of his cultivation to kill the War Dragon King despite being heavily injured. The Xuanji Grotto's top experts were only left with God King War Whale and Shueshang. Both of them were foreign aid and not the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's direct subordinates. Therefore, the Xuanji Grotto's people were like dragons without a leader, and their morale plummeted. The thousands of Ser-gods and over 20 godly kings, who were lucky enough to survive, also lost their fighting spirit and drive. Many of them fought as they retreated, looking for an opportunity to escape. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue, and the others led the Demon League's 3,000 experts and decisively formed an encirclement, swearing to kill the enemy. Seeing this scene, Xue Shang, who was already exhausted, gradually lost his fighting spirit. He stopped fighting the head of internal affairs and started to think about escaping. After all, the Xuanji Grotto's momentum was already gone. He was not the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's direct descendant, so there was no need for him to die with the Xuanji Grotto. Chapter 3789. Although God King War Whale and Ji Tianxing's battlefield was 80,000 miles away, the two had fought for almost 2 hours, but there was no clear victor. However, the two were secretly watching the battle between the thousands of soldiers, and they were anxious. At the beginning, the Myriad Demon Alliance was at a disadvantage. Ji Tianxing was worried, but God King War Whale was calm. Later, the Minister of Internal Affairs brought more than 30 God Kings into the battlefield, and the situation began to change. Ji Tianxing's mental state became much more relaxed, while God King War Whale began to worry and worry. Now that the two saw the mystical grotto's army crumble, and the Myriad Demon Alliance's people were attacking with all their might, their mentality changed again. Ji Tianxing's heart calmed down. Aside from the fact that victory was within his grasp, he was still planning how to defeat Deity King War Whale. After all, this was the first peak God King he had fought in his life. If he could not defeat him, it would be a pity. When God King War Whale saw the mystical grotto's army crumble, and even Xue Shang began to flee, his expression dimmed. Of course, he could see that the mystical grotto's momentum was gone, and they were destined to lose today's battle. With his status, he did not need to be buried with the mystical grotto. However, others could disregard their image and flee, but he could not. After all, he was a peak God King, one of the strongest people on this continent. If he fled like Xue Shang, wouldn't he lose face and become a laughingstock? How would he, a peak God King, have any dignity and glory? However, God King War Whale was even more aware that since the situation had developed to this point, he was powerless to reverse the situation. Therefore, he could only think silently. How could he withdraw from this battle without losing face? This was a difficult question. God King War Whale thought of many ways, but after some consideration, he could only give up. He admitted that Long Tian was very strong, and there was no point in continuing the battle. Why not just return home and call it a day? This would weaken the momentum of a peak God King, and make him look guilty and timid. Saying, "I suddenly remembered that I have something important to do, so I'll take my leave first?" That was too childish. Even a fool would not believe it. Moreover, this method of leaving was similar to running away in a sorry state. Was he supposed to say that the fate of the Xuanji Grotto was already decided? He wasn't a subordinate of the Xuanji Grotto, and he had already done his best. Since the situation is irreversible, I don't want to make a deadly enemy of the 10,000 Demon Alliance. If this news were to spread, it would definitely cause a huge uproar in the continent. At that time, not only would he be despised by everyone, but he would also offend the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor. This method was also undesirable. Divine King War Whale pondered for a moment, then suddenly remembered the excuse old ancestor Golden Rock used to leave. The Enigma Paradise used to be the ruler of this continent, but now it's going to fall at the hands of the Myriad Demon Alliance. Is this the will of the heavens? Sigh. Heaven's will is truly unfathomable. This king possesses the will of heaven, so naturally, I do not dare to go against heaven's will. Forget it, everything in the world is predestined. This king's retreat is also in accordance with the will of the heavens. As this thought flashed through his mind, God King War Whale's eyes lit up. He felt that this method was feasible. In any case, Patriarch Golden Rock had used this move before, so he did not feel that it was embarrassing. It should not be a problem for him to borrow it, right? However, after much consideration, God King War Whale decided to use this method as a backup plan. What he desired the most, what he thought was the most perfect and most reasonable plan, should be Long Tian taking the initiative to ask. God King War Whale, look, the Enigma Paradise has lost, and everyone has fled. Why haven't you retreated? Although the world knows that you're righteous and warm-hearted, and this king also admires you for being so righteous and powerful, there's no point in fighting. If we continue to fight, there's no point in us fighting. Why don't we stop fighting? Please leave the Enigma Paradise and stop interfering in this matter. Take it that the Myriad Demon Alliance owes you a favor. Long Tian looked at him with a sincere expression and spoke in a sincere tone. He even bowed to express his sincerity. Then, he put on a pained and helpless expression, sighed a few times, and reluctantly agreed. This was a reasonable and perfect solution. In fact, God King War Whale thought that even if the Myriad Demon Alliance did not owe him a favor, he would still agree. Unfortunately, things did not go as he wished. The reality was as follows: seeing the Enigma Paradise's soldiers being defeated and Xue Shang fleeing for his life, Long Tian smiled coldly. He was no longer worried and anxious. Instead, he focused on dealing with God King War Whale. Not only did he use his full strength, but he also used his trump card. Celestial Dragon Tyrant Body. Long Tian roared. Golden light flashed all over his body, and he suddenly turned into a giant in golden armor. Not only did his body become extremely large, but his combat strength also increased by 7 times. He was like a giant god. The primordial chaos bell flew high into the sky and quickly expanded to a radius of 30,000 miles. It covered the sky and covered the earth, suppressing God King War Whale. At the same time, Long Tian held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed out with a dazzling golden light that could split heaven and earth. Sword of Apocalypse. Without a doubt, this was Ji Tianxing's strongest state and strongest killing move. In order to defeat God King War Whale, he held nothing back. God King War Whale's expression changed. Under the suppression of the primordial chaos bell, his body bent, his strength weakened, and his speed slowed. He could not dodge the sword that could split heaven and earth slash down. Boom! Crack! The sword of Apocalypse, tens of thousands of feet long, slashed through the Enigma Paradise's spatial barrier and tore open a huge spatial rift in the sky. Outside the spatial rift, one could clearly see the dark and cold void and the dense starlight. God King War Whale knew that he could not dodge the sword. If he took it head-on, he would definitely be injured. In this critical moment, he calmly made a decision. Swoosh! With a swipe of his huge tail, he tore open a spatial rift in the sky. Then, he turned his head and passed through the spatial rift, entering the outer realm. This move seemed simple, but it required an extremely powerful divine power. One's control and understanding of divine Tao nomological laws had to be at an extremely high level as well. If one was not a peak God King, it was impossible to escape the primordial chaos bell's suppression. Once he entered the dark and cold void, God King War Whale felt the pressure decrease, and his body became lighter. He did not stop. Like a fish in water, he flew into the depths of the void at the speed of light. As a peak God King, he often roamed the void. Therefore, there was no danger for him to escape into the outer realm. Boom! Crack! The sword of Apocalypse, tens of thousands of feet long, missed its target and slashed into the ground. Coincidentally, below was the peak of the Golden Dragon mountain range. It was immediately slashed into a ravine, and half of the mountain range turned into ruins. A terrifying power of laws exploded, destroying everything within a radius of 50,000 miles, turning it into a dark void. The Enigma Paradise was shattered. Countless void storms and turbulence passed through the spatial rifts and surged into the Enigma paradise, wreaking havoc. Chapter 3790. The dimensional barrier was broken and the dimensional turbulence and storms entered the Xuanji Grotto heaven. It was absolutely destructive. Hundreds of black hurricanes swept across the Xuanji Grotto heaven and quickly spread. Wherever the hurricanes swept past, space would shatter, mountains, rivers, and other things would all turn into nothingness. In just a few breaths of time, the already dilapidated Golden Dragon mountain range was completely destroyed. Not to mention the dilapidated hillsides and mounds of earth, not even a few handfuls of yellow earth remained. Everything had turned into nothingness. The soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance and the soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto heaven who were running away saw this with their own eyes. They were terrified and they sped up to escape. Unfortunately, the speed of the dimensional storms was much faster than those divine emperors. In less than 20 breaths, the rapidly expanding dimensional rifts and hundreds of dimensional storms would swallow the thousands of divine emperors. The terrifying dimensional storms would indiscriminately crush and swallow everything. Ji Tianqing originally wanted to chase into the dimensional rifts and kill Divine King Warwhale. But when he saw this, he had to take out the chaotic primordial bell to stop the dimensional rifts and dimensional storms from spreading. He had no choice. The 3,000 soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance had to be saved. Otherwise, even if the 10,000 Demon Alliance defeated the Xuanji Grotto heaven, they would be wiped out. In the end, the dominion of the Star Source continent would still be taken away by other forces. Swish! Under Ji Tianqing's control, the chaotic primordial bell quickly expanded and became 100,000 miles wide in the blink of an eye. Such a huge divine bell was equivalent to a sky canopy. The divine bell fell from the sky and not only covered the rapidly expanding dimensional rifts, but also the hundreds of dimensional storms. There were continuous sounds of bang 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 and rustling coming from the divine bell. The gigantic divine bell also trembled violently as it kept flashing with 5-colored divine light. Apparently, the dimensional storms were attacking and cutting the divine bell. But the divine bell was an ancient divine weapon, and it contained a hint of the Tao. It stopped the expanding dimensional rifts and suppressed the terrifying dimensional storms. The crisis of the Xuanji Grotto heaven was quickly resolved, and the thousands of divine emperors who were running away were also out of danger. Everyone looked at the god clock in shock, as if they had just survived a calamity. However, the calm only lasted for a few breaths. The left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue, and the rest of them soon led the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance to encircle and annihilate the remaining survivors. The 1,000 or so remaining soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto were unable to put up any resistance. Soon, they were completely defeated. 60% of them were Golden Dragon Guards. They were loyal to the Xuanji Grotto. Even if they knew they were going to die, they would fight until the very last moment. However, the remaining 40% of godly monarchs and a few godly kings were not from the Xuanji Grotto. Some came from sects and forces under the mysterious grotto, while others came from other realms. Knowing that they would definitely die if they resisted, these people lost their will to fight and simply surrendered. After all, their loyalty to the Xuanji Grotto was built on benefit. Since the Xuanji Grotto was powerful enough, they naturally had to show their loyalty. Now that the Xuanji Grotto was doomed to be destroyed, they had to find a way out for themselves. Thus, the battle ended very quickly. After the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance killed more than 500 gold dragon guards, they began to clean the battlefield and deal with the 400 captives. On the other side, Ji Tianqing used the primordial chaos bell to block the void storm. Then, he chased into the void with his sword. After escaping into the void, God King Warwhale charged into the depths of the void without looking back. However, after flying for tens of thousands of miles, he realized that Long Tian was not chasing after him. He could not help but use his divine consciousness to check. Seeing the void storm wreaking havoc in the Xuanji Grotto, he was relieved, because he knew that Long Tian would definitely stop the space from shattering and stop the raging void storm. First, Long Tian would not allow the 3,000 soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance to be killed by the void storm. If that happened, the 10,000 Demon Alliance would be destroyed. Second, Long Tian would not allow the Xuanji Grotto to be destroyed. The 10,000 Demon Alliance still wanted to occupy the grotto and control the entire continent. Therefore, God King War Whale was certain that Long Tian would be killed by the void storm. His nervous heart immediately relaxed. However, just as he relaxed his nervous mood, his heart instantly rose again. This was because his divine consciousness had detected that Long Tian had already passed through the void rift and chased into the void with his sword. What was even more infuriating was that the moment that guy entered the void, it was as if he became a different person. He was even more like a fish in water than him. Whoosh! His speed actually doubled. Furthermore, he was incomparably adapted to the void's environment without any discomfort. Regardless of whether it was the terrifying cold air or the turbulence, traps, and storms lurking in the darkness, he could avoid them all in advance. That feeling was like the void was his home. In just an instant, the distance between the two people closed from 100,000 miles to 50,000 miles. In another 10 breaths of time, he would be caught by Long Tian. God King War Whale was shocked and enraged. He could not resist cursing in his heart, despicable bastard. Actually unwilling to give up, swearing to have a showdown with this king? This king is not someone from the Xuanji Grotto. I just came to help out on account of our relationship. Now that things have come to this king already took the initiative to retreat. How can he be so insensible? If he really forced this king into a corner and fought it out with him until both sides suffered heavy losses, is this the result that he wants to see? The way God King War Whale saw it, top powerhouses were not just powerful, they also had to be shrewd enough, adept at weighing the pros and cons, proficient in scheming and scheming. If he were Long Tian, he definitely would not pursue under this sort of circumstances. As the saying went, leave a way out for a demon so that we can meet again in the future. Giving each other a way out today, they could still turn enemies into friends in the future. Wasn't this a skill that every big shot should master? Yet, encountering Long Tian this stubborn, it was also unlucky enough. While feeling gloomy in his heart was gloomy, God King War Whale still did not dare to lower his guard, flying with all his might. However, after the two people chased for several 100,000 miles, Ji Tianxing still caught up to him. Swoosh! Wielding the sword of burial of heaven, Ji Tianxing used some kind of divine ability and actually teleported 1,000 miles in the void, blocking in front of God King War Whale. God King War Whale was immediately filled with shock, staring at Ji Tianxing with dumbfounded eyes and slack jaws. What kind of divine ability is this, to actually be able to teleport in the void? If not for the fact that he had some respect for the heavenly Tao in his heart, God King War Whale really wanted to curse out loud. Damned heavens, you cheated for this guy, right? There's no justice in this world. Ji Tianxing raised his brows, looked at God King War Whale, and said in a playful tone, "Very curious? Do you want to learn?" God King War Whale withdrew his war whale body, transforming into a 30-foot-tall human form, frowning and looking at him silently. He had a hunch that this was absolutely not something good. Indeed. Ji Tianxing said with a smile, "A long time ago, I had a companion, a blue kuan. I originally planned to raise it and make it my mount. But unfortunately it died in a great battle. And now I want to fulfill that dream. Although you're not a kuan, just a war whale, I can reluctantly accept it." Chapter 3791. God King War Whale was stunned. Anger began to build up on his face and his eyes turned cold. He didn't know how many years it had been, but this was the first time he heard that someone actually dared to say such words to his face. The creatures of the dragon realm were mostly beasts, ferocious beasts, and divine beasts. Their concept was different from that of the divinity. They rarely thought of mounts or pets. For a powerful warrior like God King Warwhale, being treated as a mount was a great insult. He glared at Ji Tianqing and said in a low and cold voice, "Long Tian, do you really want to force me? I didn't step back because I was afraid of you. I just didn't want to die with Xuanji Grotto. I didn't want to become enemies with the Myriad Beast Alliance. If you insist on going your own way, don't blame me for not showing mercy." Even though godly Emperor Battle Whale was too ashamed to speak his mind in the Xuanji Wonderland, Qin Nan did not dare to speak his mind. But now that things had progressed to this point and only he and Ji Tianqing were in the void, that was all he could say. Ji Tianqing knew what God King Warwhale was thinking and knew that he wasn't lying. But he wasn't going to back down, nor was he going to let God King Warwhale go. Haha, then why didn't you think of this when you accepted God King War Dragon's invitation to help Xuanji Grotto? Isn't it too late to say this now? Then what do you want? God King Warwhale frowned, killing intent surging in his eyes. Ji Tianqing's attitude was still unyielding. He sneered and said, "Everyone has to be responsible for their own actions, and they should pay the price for their mistakes. As a powerful God King, don't tell me you don't understand this?" God King Warwhale's face darkened even more, but he still sneered confidently. "Even so, you can't do anything to me, much less kill me." The two had fought for 2 hours and exchanged more than 10,000 blows. This was proven. Ji Tianqing didn't think so. "That's right, I can't kill you. But I can severely injure you, teach you an unforgettable lesson, and make you behave for a few decades." Now that the Myriad Demon Alliance had conquered the Xuanji Grotto, they would gradually take over the Star Source continent in the next few decades. During this period, the Myriad Demon Alliance had to guard against the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor's revenge and the Battle Whale Godking's rebellion. Ji Tianqing did not want to see any accidents during the 10,000 Demon Alliance's unification of the Star Source continent. Therefore, he felt that severely injuring God King Warwhale and forcing him to go into seclusion to recuperate for a few decades was the safest way. God King Warwhale's expression darkened as he thought about it. When he realized this, he couldn't help but grow even more furious. "Very good. Long Tian, you are indeed confident and arrogant. Then this king would like to see what other tricks and trump cards you have that you dare to boast so shamelessly." With that, God King Warwhale took out a dark golden halberd that was 6 meters long. The long handle of the halberd was as thick as an arm. Its design was exquisite, simple, and majestic. The halberd at the top was split into 3 halberds, each with a 2-edged blade that flickered with a faint blue divine light. This was God King Warwhale's natal divine artifact, the sea-splitting halberd. Of course, this was only a high-grade king-grade divine artifact. God King Warwhale's greatest regret was that he didn't have a single supreme-grade king-grade divine artifact. If not, he wouldn't be ranked last among the 4 peak God Kings of the Star Source continent. "Die Long Tian!" God King Warwhale roared with a murderous aura. He held the sea-splitting halberd with both hands and charged at Ji Tianqing domineeringly. His entire body emitted a faint blue divine light that condensed into a pair of huge wings. They could help him maneuver in the void and protect him at critical moments. With a wave of the sea-splitting halberd, blue light that covered the sky and shone with more than 200 types of laws and divine runes charged at Ji Tianqing. It was fortunate that they were fighting in the void. If they were fighting in the dragon realm, the sky would have been torn apart by the sharp blue blades. The spatial barrier of the dragon realm would not be able to withstand such powerful divine power. Ji Tianqing was enveloped by the blue light and suppressed by more than 200 types of laws and divine power. He felt his divine body stiffen, his divine power blocked, and his battle prowess was greatly reduced. Fortunately, His movements in the void were not restricted, and he had a natural advantage. Seeing the blue blades coming at him, he instantly retreated 100 miles to avoid the sharp blade. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed with all his might. Like a golden divine dragon, it charged at God King War Whale. Heavenly Dragon Slash. The holy golden dragon that was tens of thousands of feet long bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it viciously tore apart the blue blades of light that filled the sky. Unfortunately, when the holy golden dragon shattered the sharp blades that filled the sky, its power was also exhausted. God King War Whale only swung his halberd and shattered the golden dragon. The two of them were evenly matched, and neither of them had the upper hand. God King War Whale swung his halberd again and instantly shot out 96 icy blue light pillars that formed a formation and blasted at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing countered in an orderly manner, slashing out more than 200 sword lights, clashing with War Whale Deity King. The divine powers that the two of them used collapsed again. Neither of them was injured. Ji Tianxing immediately used the 10 directional vanishing shadows, and his body split into 8, creating 7 clones. He and the 7 clones worked together to form the 8 extreme battle formation and surrounded God King War Whale, attacking fiercely. God King War Whale had seen the power of this divine power when they were fighting in the Xuanji Grotto Heaven, so he naturally did not dare to underestimate it. However, he did not panic and quickly took out 9 calming divine pearls, which circled around him. Each of the 9 calming divine pearls was a superior grade king-level divine artifact. They could form an array to form a shield and release the power of a divine array to kill enemies. Under the protection of the 9 divine pearls, God King War Whale was like a tiger that had grown wings. He could deal with Ji Tianxing and the 7 clones more easily. Both sides engaged in a fierce battle in the sky, exchanging blows back and forth. Every single move was extremely exquisite and possessed extraordinary might. The aftermath of the two of them fighting was like ripples that spread in all directions, creating layers of ripples in the vast void. Unfortunately, there was no audience for this marvelous battle. If there were other God King experts present here, they would surely be dazzled and fascinated by this scene, and they would be filled with admiration. After all, this was a battle between the top experts of the Starsource continent and even the entire Dragon Realm. Many divine lords and divine kings might not be able to see it with their own eyes in their entire lives. Not to mention the dazzling light of the divine arts when the two of them were fighting, it was very enjoyable to watch. Just their understanding of divine powers, laws and techniques were enough for many divine kings to learn and comprehend. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. Soon, 10 hours had passed. Ji Tianxing and God King War Whale exchanged 100,000 moves, and both of them had used up almost half of their divine power, but they were still evenly matched. Both of them were slightly injured, but neither of them had the upper hand. God King War Whale gradually lost his patience, and wanted to mock Ji Tianxing before thinking of a way to retreat. However, he did not expect the primordial chaos bell to fly over from afar and join the battle. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3792. Ji Tianxing's strength was not enough to make God King War Whale wary. What he was truly wary of was the primordial chaos bell. When he was escaping from abstruse Grotto Heaven, God King War Whale used his consciousness to detect that Ji Tianxing had left the divine bell in abstruse Grotto Heaven to block the spatial rifts and void storms. Therefore, even if Ji Tianxing caught up to him and swore to defeat him, he was not worried. But it was different now. Under the suppression of the primordial chaos bell, the spatial rifts and void storms in abstruse Grotto Heaven rapidly weakened. Under the restoration of the heavenly Tao laws, the spatial rifts quickly closed. Abstruse Grotto Heaven's spatial barrier had been restored, and the primordial chaos bell's mission was completed. It actually returned to Ji Tianxing's hands. He was like a tiger that had grown wings, and his combat strength increased greatly. God King Warwell's expression changed immediately, and he made up his mind to escape. Without the Divine Bell's help, Ji Tianxing could fight him to a draw. Now that Ji Tianxing had the Divine Bell, he was definitely no match for him. Swoosh! God King Warwhale exchanged a blow with Ji Tianxing, and used the powerful impact to escape into the depths of the void. His speed was raised to the limit, and he turned into a faint blue light, traveling thousands of miles in an instant. But Ji Tianxing was already prepared. The moment he turned to escape, he cast a spell to activate the primordial chaos bell, and it expanded to a radius of tens of thousands of miles. The massive primordial chaos bell was as black as ink, and it seemed to have become one with the void. In just an instant, it covered a radius of 50,000 miles, sealing off the area. God King Warwhale had just flown 40,000 miles when he was about to crash into the primordial chaos bell's wall. He reacted instantly, and he was shocked and angry. He could not help but curse, "Damn beast! Is he really going to kill me? What is he relying on? Isn't he afraid of forcing me into a corner?" As he cursed, he hurriedly stopped running, and he turned to look at Ji Tianxing with the sea-splitting halberd in his hand. He saw that in the void tens of thousands of miles behind him, Ji Tianxing was flying over unhurriedly. He was certain that Divine King Warwhale would not be able to escape and would definitely be suppressed within the primordial chaos bell. There was a confident smile on his face. Deity King Warwhale was also very calm. He released his divine senses and used his divine arts to observe the primordial chaos bell. He already knew how powerful the primordial chaos bell was, but this was the first time he was trapped inside it. Even though he knew that there wasn't much hope, he still wanted to give it a try. He wanted to see if he could break through the suppression of the divine clock and escape. He could clearly sense that not only was the divine bell incomparably sturdy and difficult to break, but it was also imbued with powerful laws and array Tao divine power. If they wanted to escape from the divine clock's seal, it would definitely not be a simple matter. They would need to think about it at length. However, before he could further investigate the mystery of the God clock, Ji Tianxing flew over. Seeing that Ji Tianxing had no intention of communicating and was about to attack, God King Warwhale frowned and said in a low voice, "Long Tian, what are you trying to do? Your aggressiveness will do no good to the 10,000 Demon Alliance. I believe that you are not such a reckless person, either. If you have any conditions or requests, we can still talk about it." Ji Tianxing's unreasonableness gave God King Warwhale a headache. He felt that Ji Tianxing's actions were unreasonable. Even though Ji Tianxing had explained the reason was not sufficient. It was too far-fetched. God King Warwhale felt that Ji Tianxing must have some other scheme. It was just that he was unwilling to say it out loud. Hearing God King Warwhale's words, Ji Tianxing, who was about to attack, was stunned. He raised his eyebrows and said in a playful tone, "I have said many times that I only want to injure you and ask you to obediently go into seclusion for a few decades. Why don't you believe me? Why do you feel that I have other motives? Is that not the case? How can there be such a ridiculous reason?" God King Warwhale frowned and asked. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and said with a serious expression, "Since you don't want to fight and want to use other methods to solve this matter, I will give you a chance. As long as you agree to my two conditions, today's matter will be over. How about it?" God King Warwhale was silent. He thought to himself, "This despicable little bastard, he really has other motives." Although he was secretly relieved and felt that there was still room for negotiation, he was still wary. However, he was also full of vigilance. He was worried that Ji Tianxing would make an excessive request. After a moment of consideration, he nodded and said, "What are the conditions?" Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly, "First, you have to answer one of my questions truthfully. There must not be any deception." God King Warwhale frowned and seemed to want to bargain. Ji Tianxing added, Don't worry, this question will not make you reveal any secrets, nor will it harm the interests of you and the War Whale clan. God King Warwell's brows relaxed when he heard that. He nodded and said, I can agree to this. What's the second condition? Ji Tianqing said with a playful smile. You also know that the reason I pursued you so relentlessly is because I want you to rest for a few decades. Let's not beat around the bush. The Xuanji Grotto heaven has been conquered, and the Star Source continent is ours. In the next few decades, we will be busy taking over the Star Source continent. We have no time to waste on you. So, you only need to swear a heavenly oath that you will not interfere with the Myriad Demon Alliance's takeover of the Star Source continent for the next 100 years. You cannot become enemies with the Myriad Demon Alliance, nor can you directly or indirectly interfere with this matter. In this way, this king's goal can be achieved, and naturally, I won't fight with you again. What do you think? This. God King Warwhale frowned and fell into hesitation. His face was very dark, and his eyes flashed with anger. Obviously, he felt that being forced to swear a heavenly oath was a very humiliating thing. Previously, he learned from God King War Dragon that Xue Shang was forced by Ji Tianqing to swear a heavenly oath that he would not attack Ji Tianqing. At that time, he felt that it was laughable, and even Xue Shang snorted and looked down on him. He did not expect that in the blink of an eye, he would follow in Xue Shang's footsteps and become a laughing stock. However, he was in a very passive position now. No matter how humiliating this condition was, he could not easily reject it. He had to weigh the pros and cons and consider the consequences of this matter. Ji Tianqing was not anxious and did not rush him. He patiently waited for his answer. His expression and attitude were very calm. Even if God King Warwhale did not agree to this condition, he did not care. At most, the negotiation would fall apart, and they would continue to fight. After about 20 breaths of time, God King Warwhale raised his head and looked at Ji Tianqing expressionlessly. The anger in his eyes had already dissipated. Clearly, he had suppressed the anger in his heart and made a choice. Long Tian, I can agree to 2 of your conditions, but you must keep it a secret and not reveal it to anyone. This is the agreement between you and me. Ji Tianqing was not surprised by God King Warwhale's conditions. After all, God King Warwhale was also afraid that he would reveal the news and embarrass himself, becoming the laughingstock of the Star Source continent. Chapter 3793. After God King Warwhale finished speaking, he stared coldly at Ji Tianqing, waiting for his reaction. Ji Tianqing revealed a playful smile and said, Although I can understand your feelings, I'm sorry, but I can't agree to your conditions. You. God King Warwhale was enraged, his eyes flashing with fury. Terrifying killing intent burst out from his body, and he was about to turn hostile and break the agreement. Ji Tianqing, however, was not in a hurry. He continued, God King Warwhale, you need to be clear about your situation. You don't want to fight right now, so I'm giving you a chance to settle this peacefully. If you can't accept these 2 conditions, then we'll have to return to the previous topic and see who's stronger. Let's fight first. As he spoke, he activated the primal chaos bell and released a majestic aura, causing the pressure on God King Warwhale to multiply. God King Warwhale fell silent again, his anger and killing intent receding into his body. He frowned deeply, his expression dark as he pondered. His heart was clearly conflicted. Ji Tianqing knew that he was at a critical juncture, and the slightest mistake could change his mind. In fact, he was acting so forcefully because he knew what God King Warwhale was thinking. He didn't want to be buried with Enigma Grotto, and wanted to protect himself. Now, he had forced God King Warwhale to a dead end. If Shao Chen continued to pressure him, this peak divine king would probably get angry and start an intense battle for the sake of his dignity and face. Even if Ji Tianqing was confident that he could injure God King Warwhale with the primal chaos bell, he wouldn't have it easy either. Ji Tianxing didn't want to see both sides suffer. After all, he still had many things to do. Therefore, when he saw God King Warwhale so hesitant and conflicted, he said, God King Warwhale, although I can't agree to your conditions and help you keep this secret, I believe you. I'm not a talkative person, and I won't make a joke of this matter and spread it everywhere. This won't do me any good. You know that I only want the 10,000 Demon Alliance to take over the Star Origin continent smoothly. Why would I cause any trouble? Seeing that Ji Tianxing's words were reasonable, and his expression, eyes, and tone were sincere and calm, God King Warwhale couldn't help but believe him a little. But he was still a little worried, so he tried to say, "But, you still have to give me a promise before I can be at ease." There was a difference between a promise and an oath. Of course, for top experts like him and Ji Tianxing, a promise was also very effective, second only to an oath to the heavens. After all, they were all peak divine kings, and also the few people with the highest authority and status on Starsource continent. Everyone cherished their reputation and reputation. No one would be a fickle and untrustworthy person, even Xueshang, who did not have a dignified and domineering aura, did not dare to speak carelessly. Therefore, as long as Ji Tianxing made a promise in person, God King Battle Whale would feel much more at ease. Ji Tianxing stared at God King Battle Whale and analyzed his thoughts through his eyes and subtle expressions. After a while, Ji Tianxing was sure that this was God King Battle Whale's bottom line, and also the only thing that worried him. As long as this problem was solved, God King Battle Whale should be able to accept it calmly. Therefore, Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said with a serious expression, God King Battle Whale, I can promise you that this matter will not be leaked. At most, I will only let a few people I trust know, and I will order them not to leak it. This. God King Battle Whale's expression eased a lot, but he fell into deep thought and did not immediately agree. Ji Tianxing looked at him calmly. His expression didn't change, and he didn't say anything. Obviously, he had already shown his bottom line by saying so much. God King Battle Whale was naturally aware of this. After pondering for a while, he finally sighed and nodded. Fine. I have no grudges with you or the Myriad Demon Alliance. I can only blame myself for taking a wrong step and helping Mysterious Grotto. Now that we've come to this conclusion, it can be said that we've settled our grudges. Ask away, Long Tian. Ji Tianxing did not waste any more time and asked directly, more than 10 years ago, did you attack the lower realms? Or did you save or see a human youth? Lower realms? God King Battle Whale frowned, his face full of doubt and confusion. Although peak God Kings can comprehend the will of the heavenly Tao and condense a trace of the Tao, they are qualified to intervene in the lower realms. However, I was born in the Dragon Realm and grew up in the Dragon Realm. I have nothing to do with the lower realms. In fact, I have never even been to the God Realm, so why would I intervene in the lower realms' affairs? As for the human youth you speak of, I heard that the human race is an ancient race, right? Didn't they die out 30,000 years ago? Truth be told, I've never seen a human before in my life. God King Battle Whale's expression was rather strange. His gaze when looking at Ji Tianxing clearly had the meaning of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Originally, he even thought that Ji Tianxing was going to ask about some important matter, some secrets related to the Dragon Realm. He did not expect that he would actually ask such a nonsensical thing. Ji Tianxing observed his expression carefully. Seeing his reaction, he knew that he was not lying. Back then, Ji Tianxing returned to the Dragon Realm precisely to find Ji Wuhan. Although what abducted Wuhan across the realm back then was a golden dragon's enormous claw. But Ji Tianxing could not confirm that the one who abducted Wuhan was definitely a peak God King realm golden dragon. That golden dragon's enormous claw might just be a divine ability transformed from an arcane art. Therefore, every peak God King was suspicious. Even God King Battle Whale was no exception. It was precisely because of this point that Ji Tianqing thought of asking God King Battle Whale this question at the last minute. Since he was sure that God King Battle Whale had nothing to do with this matter, then he did not need to investigate God King Battle Whale anymore. Hence he continued, God King Battle Whale, you should fulfill the second condition. The second condition was naturally to swear a Heavenly Tao oath. Regarding the contents of the Heavenly Tao oath, God King Battle Whale pondered for a moment and had an idea. He gathered his emotions, his expression becoming solemn, and was about to open his mouth to recite the oath. But Ji Tianqing suddenly reached out and interrupted him. Hold on! God King Battle Whale's open mouth immediately closed, forcefully swallowing the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He turned his head to look at Ji Tianqing and asked with a frown, What's wrong? Ji Tianqing took out a jade slip and handed it to him with a playful smile, saying, It's a Heavenly Tao oath, so of course it has to be solemn and cautious. Don't say every sentence, even every word has to be carefully considered. What you thought of in a hurry is most likely not perfect and strict enough. I've already helped you think of the specific content of the oath. Just recite it according to this. God King Battle Whale was stunned on the spot. His expression was as if he had seen a ghost, his eyes glaring angrily at Ji Tianqing. That gaze seemed to be saying, What the hell? You predicted this step long ago, and even made preparations in advance just to scheme against this king? Chapter 3794. Although God King War Whale understood the truth, he was even more depressed and aggrieved than before. Especially when he saw the Heavenly Tao oath that had been prepared in the jade slip. His heart collapsed and he was speechless. The Heavenly Tao oath that Ji Tianqing had provided was actually long and detailed, with a total of over 1,000 words. The contents of the oath not only described in detail the promise that God King War Whale had to fulfill, it also took into account all kinds of normal and abnormal accidents, and also limited and explained them. All in all, this was an oath to the Heaven Tao that was extremely perfect and detailed to the point of being horrifying. It was utterly impossible to pick out the slightest mistake from it, and it was impossible to take advantage of it. Your Heavenly Tao oath is really strict enough. God King War Whale held the jade slip and looked at Ji Tianqing with a complicated expression, gritting his teeth as he spoke. Ji Tianqing ignored his anger and said indifferently, It's good to be strict, this way you and I can both be at ease, and the Heavenly Tao will also feel that we are sincere. God King War Whale frowned and lowered his voice, saying in a contemptuous tone, Long Tian, you are also a peak God King, don't be so mysterious. Do you think that a mere Heavenly Tao oath can restrain people's hearts? You should know very well that other than those ignorant weaklings, the stronger one is, the less respect they have for the Heavenly Tao. Ji Tianqing could not help but reveal a cold smile. Since you do not respect the Heavenly Tao and feel that a Heavenly Tao oath cannot restrain you, why don't you hurry up and swear a Heavenly Tao oath and end this matter? God King War Whale was speechless and his face flushed red. Indeed, he was like many God King experts, feeling that the concepts of Heavenly Tao oath and Heavenly Tao will were too illusory. After all, from ancient times until now, no one could say for sure what the Heavenly Tao was. But the power of the Heavenly Tao was real. No one could go against their conscience and say that the Heavenly Tao did not exist. Therefore, everyone's mentality was very complicated, and they were skeptical of Heavenly Tao oaths and rules. For example, Xue Shang was in such a situation and mentality during this period of time. He was very confused and very aggrieved. Many times, he wanted to ignore the Heavenly Tao oath and fight to the death with Ji Tianqing. But when this thought appeared in his mind, his hands and feet would be tied, and he could not help but shrink back. God King War Whale was silent for a moment before he suppressed his sullen and depressed emotions. At this point, he could not resist. He only wanted to end this as soon as possible and then return to the South Sea to cultivate in seclusion. He did not want to see Ji Tianqing again. This person was too hateful. Then, God King War Whale held the jade slip and began to recite the Heavenly Tao Oath with a solemn expression. Ji Tianxing originally wanted to take back the primordial chaos bell to prevent the Tao runes of this divine artifact from affecting the Heavenly Tao's senses. But he obviously worried too much. God King Warwell's clear voice reverberated through the primordial bell. Soon, strands of Taoist rhymes appeared above his head and around him, and the will of the Heavenly Tao descended. Clearly, even a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact like the primordial chaos bell could not block the detection of the heavenly way. When God King War Whale was halfway through reciting the Heavenly Tao Oath, the heavenly way's senses had already formed. Around God King War Whale, mystic rays of Taoist rhymes formed like lotuses. After a short while, when God King War Whale finished reciting the Heavenly Tao Oath, thunder rumbled in the void, and the mighty power of the Heavenly Tao descended. God King War Whale's divine body and divine spark were enveloped by the power of the Heavenly Tao, forming a connection with the Heavenly Tao. This meant that the Heavenly Tao Oath had been formed and came into effect. Previously, God King War Whale was still skeptical about the binding power of the Heavenly Tao Oath. But now, he personally felt the power of the Heavenly Tao. That vast and mighty power that he could not muster the slightest bit of resistance caused his expression to change. His face was a little pale, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. There was also a trace of reverence and fear in his eyes. He did not doubt that if the mighty power of the Heavenly Tao wanted to punish him, he would not be able to resist at all and would be reduced to ashes immediately. The will of the Heavenly Tao, the Heavenly Tao Oath, it really does exist. God King War Whale held the jade slip in his hand, watching the Tao charm gradually dissipate with a pale complexion as he muttered in his heart. After 10 breaths, the power of the Heavenly Tao and the Tao charm already dissipated. Everything returned to tranquility. But God King War Whale's heart was still surging with raging waves, unable to calm down. And at this time, Ji Tianxing was also frowning, currently pondering over a problem. Strange, God King War Whale swore the Heavenly Tao Oath and indeed attracted the Heavenly Tao law and power. It even bore a lotus-like Tao charm. But back then, when Xueshang swore the Heavenly Tao Oath, there was no such activity at all? Could it be that the Heavenly Tao Oath I made Xueshang swear was really too simple, and didn't receive the response of the Heavenly Tao, so it didn't come into effect? Ji Tianxing knew that there would still be many opportunities to become enemies with peak divine kings in the future. But most of the time, if he could not kill a peak divine king, he had to restrain the other party's actions. Then, the Heavenly Tao Oath was the best choice. Through Xueshang and God King War Whale's experiences, he roughly figured out the way and also had a clear judgment on whether the Heavenly Tao Oath was effective or not. He felt that this matter could be studied more thoroughly. If he could grasp the correct way to open the Heavenly Tao Oath, it would definitely be much more convenient for him to do things in the future. Just as he was thinking, God King War Whale had already come to his senses and looked at him expressionlessly. He said, "Long Tian, I have already fulfilled my promise. Shouldn't you also?" God King War Whale did not say anything, only looking up at the huge primordial chaos bell. Ji Tianxing immediately collected his thoughts and did not say anything more. He raised his hand and put away the primordial chaos bell. Swoosh! The huge primordial chaos bell instantly shrunk to the size of a foot and floated beside Ji Tianxing. As he put away the divine bell, God King War Whale only felt the pressure on him suddenly decrease, and his entire body relaxed. He tidied his clothes, used his divine power to wipe away the cold sweat on his forehead, and turned to leave. He did not want to stay a moment longer, nor did he want to look at Ji Tianxing. He did not even want to say goodbye. However, Ji Tianxing put away the primordial chaos bell and reminded him, God King War Whale, remember your promise today. For the next 100 years, stay in the South Sea obediently and do not interfere with the continent's affairs. Of course, God King War Whale remembered. Why did he need Ji Tianxing to remind him? He was unhappy and replied with some anger, Of course, I will fulfill my promise. Probably because he was angry, he could not help but ask, Long Tian, although I will not interfere in this matter, don't forget that the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor is still safe and sound. When the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor returns, he will definitely take revenge on the 10,000 Demon Alliance. At that time, if the 10,000 Demon Alliance cannot resist, they will spit out what they have eaten. If you die in the hands of the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor, I will still be very happy. Chapter 3795. Divine Emperor Battle Whale's words were sincere. Although he had reached an agreement with Ji Tianxing, it did not mean that there was no enmity between them. It also did not mean that he did not hate Ji Tianxing. It was just that he had weighed the pros and cons, suppressed his resentment, and was forced to accept this solution. At the same time, he did not mention the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor to threaten or remind Ji Tianxing. He was just stating a fact. Everyone in the Star Source continent knew that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was undoubtedly the strongest. Not only was he the first to become famous, but he also possessed a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact. Old Ancestor Golden Rock, Alliance Leader Luoho, and Divine Emperor Battle Whale could not be compared to him. Now that the Myriad Demon Alliance had conquered the Enigma Grotto Heaven, they wanted to seize the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's legacy. This was an irreconcilable hatred. Everyone knew that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor would definitely rush back to the Dragon Realm and take revenge on the Myriad Demon Alliance. At that time, Ji Tianxing and Alliance leader Luo Ho would not be able to defeat the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor, or they would be killed by the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor. The Myriad Demon Alliance's efforts would still be in vain. It did not mean that the Myriad Demon Alliance would be able to stabilize their position after conquering the Enigma Grotto Heaven. Ji Tianxing smiled and cupped his fists at Divine Emperor Battle Whale. You don't have to worry about this. Or you can stay in the South Sea and wait for news. Divine Emperor Battle Whale frowned and did not say anything after seeing how confident he was, as if he already had the confidence to deal with the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor. Swoosh. He still didn't even say a word of farewell. He turned around and flew away with a cold face. Soon, he disappeared into the pitch-black void. Ji Tianxing looked in the direction he left and sighed. I thought that as a peak Divine Emperor, he would have some dignity and pride and would definitely not agree to my conditions. That way, I would be able to fight him with all my strength and injure him. I did not expect him to be so cunning and flexible. He even accepted such a humiliating heavenly oath. Ji Tianxing's tone was filled with regret and pity. After all, Divine Emperor Battle Whale was the first peak Divine Emperor he had fought. He was also the best test. It was a pity that he did not get to test his true strength and potential. After a while, Ji Tianxing stepped through the void and returned to the Xuanji Grotto. Although the void storm in the Xuanji Grotto Heaven had dissipated and the spatial tear had basically healed, the Xuanji Grotto Heaven was still in the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. However, the time was too short. There were still some cracks left on the spatial barrier, and they were slowly being repaired by the power of the heavenly law. Ji Tianxing found a spatial crack and forcefully tore it open. Then, he passed through the spatial crack and returned to the Xuanji Grotto. It had been a few hours since the battle had begun. Aside from the violent divine power lingering in the air, Xuanji Grotto had returned to normal. Ji Tianxing flew across the sky and saw that the Golden Dragon mountain range had already disappeared, turning into yellow sand and ravines. On a relatively flat piece of land, he saw the soldiers of the Myriad Demon Alliance, as well as over 1,000 Sir-Gods and a dozen godly kings from the Xuanji Grotto. All of them wore ragged clothes and were covered in bloodstains. They seemed to be in a miserable state, and they were extremely exhausted and haggard. However, the soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto looked numb and gloomy. Their eyes were filled with confusion and fear. Obviously, they were temporarily captives and did not know what their fate would be. On the other hand, the 3,000 soldiers of the Myriad Demon Alliance were in a better state of mind, and they were in high spirits. Everyone had a victorious smile on their faces. At that moment, 2,000 of the 3,000 soldiers were meditating on the ground, concentrating on healing their wounds. The other 1,000 soldiers were Kenshin soldiers with swords, guarding over the 1,000 captives. Ji Tianqing scanned the crowd with his divine consciousness and saw the left and right protectors and Hu Xinyue, who were severely injured. They were healing their wounds and waiting silently. However, Fu Ergu, the Minister of Internal Affairs, and Wanli Divine King were nowhere to be seen. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing flew across the sky and came to the crowd, landing next to the left and right protectors. The two of them and Hu Xinyue quickly came forward and bowed to Ji Tianqing. "Young Master, you're back? Young Master, are you hurt? Where's Divine King War Whale? Has he been killed by the Young Master?" The three of them looked at Ji Tianqing with concern. However, Ji Tianqing did not know whether to laugh or cry at Hu Xinyue's question. He could not help but ask, "Divine King War Whale is a peak Divine King. Why is the Great Elder so confident in me? How can a dignified peak Divine King be killed at will?" Hu Xinyue was stunned for a moment. Only then did she realize that her confidence in the young master was too strong and unreasonable. However, she quickly smiled and explained, "Divine King War Whale is a peak Divine King, but so is the young master. Moreover, I believe that with the young master's strength and means, killing Divine King War Whale will not be a problem." The left and right protectors also nodded in agreement. The three of them looked at Ji Tianqing with burning eyes. Their faces were full of anticipation, waiting for him to reveal the outcome of Divine King War Whale. Ji Tianqing did not explain the details. He just said, "Divine King War Whale is not dead, but he returned to the South Sea. For the next 100 years, he will not be our enemy." Hearing this, the three of them's eyes lit up. They all showed excited expressions. "As I expected, Divine King War Whale is really not the young master's match." Ha ha ha, the peak Divine King War Whale was also seriously injured by the young master. He could only escape to the South Sea in a sorry state and go into seclusion to heal his injuries for 100 years. The young master is mighty. Clearly, the left and right protectors and Hu Xinyue had misunderstood. Ji Tianqing only said that Divine King War Whale had returned to the South Sea and would not attack again for 100 years. However, the three of them were confident in their imagination and thought that Divine King War Whale was seriously injured and needed to heal for 100 years to recover. However, Ji Tianqing did not intend to explain this misunderstanding. "Where's Fu Ergu? Where did he go?" The left and right protectors hurriedly explained, replying the young master, "During the battle previously, Lord Steward dealt with Divine King War Dragon and Shueshang. He killed Divine King War Dragon in the battle. Unfortunately, Shueshang had a supreme-grade divine artifact in hand. Lord Steward could not do anything to him. In the end, Shueshang charged out and killed more than 200 of our experts before escaping from Xuanji Grotto Heaven." Hearing up to here, Ji Tianqing frowned and asked somewhat worriedly, "Could it be that Fu Ergu went to chase after Shueshang? Shueshang has old ancestor Qiongqi's indestructible golden body. Even if Fu Ergu chases after him, it's useless." Hu Xinyue hurriedly waved her hand and explained, "Don't worry, young master. Lord Steward also understands this, so he did not pursue. Lord Steward only brought a dozen Divine King powerhouses to patrol Xuanji Grotto Heaven, searching for those who escaped from the battle previously." Only then did Ji Tianqing relax. He nodded and said, "Then I'm relieved. During the battle previously, there were indeed many divine kings who had their divine bodies destroyed by me, but their divine cores escaped. Fu Ergu personally led the team. Hopefully, he can clean up those guys." The left and right protectors hurriedly nodded, indicating that Lord Steward would definitely complete the mission. Chapter 3796. After figuring out Fu Ergu's whereabouts, Ji Tianxing asked about the situation of the captives. The left and right protectors and Hu Xinyue counted the captives and registered their names, waiting for Ji Tianxing to deal with them. There were a total of 972 captives. Among them, there were 960 god monarchs and 12 god kings. It was Ji Tianxing's decision to kill or keep them. Ji Tianxing's eyes swept across the captives and asked, "If I'm not wrong, you killed all the Golden Dragon guards before the war ended?" The left protector nodded and said, "Young master, you have sharp eyes. That is indeed the case. Those Golden Dragon guards are loyal to Xuanji Grotto. We must kill them all to be at ease." Ji Tianxing pointed at the captives and said, "Since the remaining captives are all subordinate forces of Xuanji Grotto, their loyalty to Xuanji Grotto is limited. In fact, many of them have no grudges with our union. They just followed the wrong master." The right protector nodded slightly and agreed, "Young master, you are right." Hu Xinyue's eyes brightened. She could roughly guess what Ji Tianxing meant. She asked, "Young master, you mean," Ji Tianxing said calmly, "find out the identity of each captive. If they have any grudges with our union that cannot be resolved, kill them. If they have no grudges with our union, take them in if you can. If you can't, let them go. Of course, before you let them go, everyone must swear a heavenly oath." The left and right protectors and Hu Xinyue were stunned. They turned to look at Ji Tianxing with puzzlement. "Young master, why do you want them to swear a heavenly oath? If you want to force them to swear a heavenly oath, why not force them to join our union and work for us?" Ji Tianxing waved his hand and smiled. "You don't understand. Even if they were forced to join the alliance, they would still have complaints in their hearts. When our union is strong, it is fine. If we encounter a crisis, they will be the source of internal strife. They are a great danger. As for making them swear an oath to the heavenly Tao, it is also to ensure that they will not go against our alliance in the future." After he finished speaking, he took out a jade slip and instructed the three of them. "Here is a copy of the heavenly Tao oath. The three of you should make a few copies and carry out this matter one by one." Hu Xinyue subconsciously nodded her head and said, "Yes." She didn't think much about it. When she took the jade slip and used her divine sense to look at the model of the heavenly Tao oath, her expression suddenly became somewhat strange. "This, young master, are you sure you want them to swear according to this model?" Ji Tianxing nodded calmly. Hu Xinyue had no choice but to follow his orders. The left and right protectors didn't know what was going on. They bowed to Ji Tianxing and left with Hu Xinyue to carry out the mission. Not long after, when the two of them forced the captive in front of them to recite the heavenly Tao oath according to the model, the two of them widened their eyes, and their expressions became rather strange. Only now did they understand the reason for Hu Xinyue's strange expression. The model of the heavenly Tao oath given by young master is really detailed and rigorous enough. Listening to the captives' sorrowful expressions and solemn tones as they recited the 1,000-word oath, the left and right protectors inexplicably sympathized with them. Fortunately, the captives' hearts were like dead ashes, and they were full of despair. They thought that there was no way out for them. Now they were told that they only needed to recite the heavenly Tao oath, and they could leave alive without any punishment. To them, this was simply a piece of heavenly good news. Therefore, even if they recited the heavenly Tao oath that was sufficiently rigorous, they did not feel ashamed at all. Instead, they enjoyed it. Dealing with thousands of captives was a very troublesome and time-consuming thing. In particular, every captive had to be interrogated about their identity and background, and strive to be recruited into the 10,000 Demon Alliance. If they were unwilling to join the 10,000 Demon Alliance, they had to recite the heavenly Tao oath before they could leave. After such a torment, every captive would be delayed for half an hour. As a result, the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying, and the 3 elders, a total of 7 people, still took more than half a day to carry out this mission. In this half a day, Ji Tianxing had been tidying up the spoils of war and patrolling the Xuanji Grotto. Needless to say, the spoils of war were, of course, priceless. Just the godhood fragments in his spatial ring alone numbered more than 120, and they were all godhood fragments of godkings. As for patrolling the Xuanji Grotto, the reason was that the Xuanji Grotto's territory was too vast, and it was Ji Tianxing's first time here. He had to carefully inspect the Xuanji Grotto once, to have a sufficient understanding of it, and to look for places that might be dangerous. For example, was there any place in the Xuanji Grotto where some godkings and Golden Dragon Guard commanders were hiding? Or was there a hidden teleportation formation that could lead to the Dragon Realm? Or was there a place where the spatial barrier was weaker that could be broken through from the void and infiltrated the Xuanji Grotto? Ji Tianxing had to be on guard against these questions. It was worth mentioning that Ji Tianxing spent a total of 3 days patrolling the entire Xuanji Grotto. In the process of patrolling, he met the Chief of Internal Affairs, Fu Ergu, who was leading a dozen godkings to search for the defeated soldiers. Fu Ergu killed a dozen hidden godhoods and handed them to Ji Tianxing. In the process of patrolling, Ji Tianxing also found a few hidden godhoods and smashed them into pieces. As a result, he had a total of 150 godhood fragments. In addition, he also found a few hidden palaces and 2 hidden treasure vaults. The palaces with special functions and the treasure vaults with hidden treasures were all guarded by a large number of Golden Dragon Guards. Ji Tianxing acted alone and killed all the Golden Dragon Guards. A few palaces remained, but the 2 treasure vaults were emptied. After 3 days, everything was done. The spoils of war that he had accumulated were already a terrifying amount of wealth. That evening, Ji Tianxing returned to the ruins of the Golden Dragon Mountain. 3,000 soldiers and all the overlords of the Monster League were waiting for him there. The thousands of captives had already been dealt with. Other than the 5 God Kings and hundreds of divine lords who were willing to join the Monster League, the others left the Xuanji Grotto after swearing an oath. At that moment, everyone was looking at Ji Tianxing, waiting for his orders to carry out the next step of the plan. Ji Tianxing already had a plan, so he ordered the left and right protectors, the Chief of Internal Affairs and the others, take the soldiers of the League back to the Monster City immediately and recuperate. When I'm not in the Monster City, the Chief of Internal Affairs and the left and right protectors will be in charge. Upon hearing this order, it wasn't just the left and right protectors and elders who paled in fright. Many hall masters, branch masters, and divine lord experts were also surprised and confused. Only the Chief of Internal Affairs, Fu Ergu, seemed to have known Ji Tianxing's plan, and he still looked calm. Chapter 3797. Many hall masters, branch masters, and monarch god experts were fearful of Ji Tianxing. Even if they were confused, no one dared to make a ruckus or question him. However, the left and right protectors and Hu Xinyue had won Ji Tianxing's trust and respect. Confused, the 3 of them asked Ji Tianxing in a low voice, "Young master, are you sure you want everyone to retreat? What if other forces occupy it?" "Young master, we have gone through so much and paid such a huge price to occupy Xuanji Grotto Heaven. The billions of people in Stellar Source Continent all think that Xuanji Grotto Heaven is the rightful ruler. If we don't occupy it, how can we justify it?" Ji Tianxing's expression did not change as he secretly explained to the 3 through voice transmission, "The soldiers have just fought a great battle. It is not suitable for them to stay here. It is better for them to return to Myriad Demon City to recuperate. Don't worry, I will stay here and try to seal Xuanji Grotto Heaven. I will not let it fall into the hands of others. Moreover, as long as the Gold Source Dragon Emperor is not eliminated, our alliance will not be able to truly control Stellar Source Continent. Even if everyone stays here, once the Gold Source Dragon Emperor returns, these soldiers will have died in vain. The left and right protectors and Hu Xinyue suddenly understood Ji Tianqing's meaning. The three of them knew very well that although the Myriad Demon Alliance had won this battle, they had suffered great losses. Not to mention that the number of God King experts had been halved. Just the number of Monarch God experts had been reduced by 60%. These 3,000 soldiers were the last backbone of the Myriad Demon Alliance. If the Gold Source Dragon Emperor returned and killed all of them or even half of them, the Myriad Demon Alliance's foundation would be severely damaged. The consequences would be unimaginable. Therefore, as long as the Gold Source Dragon Emperor was alive, the Myriad Demon Alliance would not be at ease and would not be able to smoothly control the entire continent. Ji Tianqing reminded them again, "I will stay here for a while. You must keep this a secret. Also, I have already instructed the Chief of Internal Affairs to contact Alliance Master Luo Ho and ask him to come back as soon as possible. You don't have to worry. Just do as I say." Only then did the three of them truly feel relieved, and they hurriedly complied. Next, Fu Ergu, the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue, and the others led the 3,000 soldiers out of the Xuanji Grotto. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, Yank, and the others were also severely injured. They all returned to the distorted space-time to recuperate. In just an hour, the Enigma Grotto had become quiet and desolate. Ji Tianqing was left alone in the Enigma Paradise. Only then did he begin to deal with the aftermath. He rushed to the exit of the Grotto Heaven and destroyed the remaining divine formations. Then, he took out a large number of origin stones, high-grade divine stones, and hundreds of Emperor-grade divine artifacts, and started to set up a divine formation. For the time being, he was unable to set up a Supreme-grade King-grade divine array. However, he could set up 9 high-grade King-grade divine formations, stack them, and merge them together to form a divine formation that was no weaker than a Supreme-grade King-grade divine formation. This divine formation was called the 9 Bends of the Heaven River Formation. It could absorb the power of the stars and seal the entrance of the Xuanji Grotto. Without this formation, one would not be able to enter or leave the Xuanji Grotto. Even a peak God King would have to use a Supreme-grade King-grade divine artifact to break through this formation. Ji Tianqing knew very well that no matter what formation he set up, it would not be able to stop the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor. He had set up this divine formation only to stop experts other than the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor from entering. Furthermore, when the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor returned and wanted to enter the Xuanji Grotto, he would have to break through this divine formation. It would take a long time. He would also add some special restrictions to the divine formation. This way, when the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor attacked the divine formation, he would be able to sense it no matter where he was. Swoosh! Swoosh! Ji Tianqing stood in the sky. Facing the mountain of origin stones, and divine artifacts on the ground, he sent out beams of divine light with his palms. Under his control, many materials for setting up the divine formation flew out like flowing water and landed around the exit. Then, he made hand seals and began to set up the divine formation. First, he set up the foundation of the divine formation. Next, he set up the veins of the divine formation. Everything proceeded in an orderly manner. Time passed quickly. Day after day passed. Ji Tianqing was so focused on setting up the divine formation that he forgot about time. He was extremely focused. By the time he successfully set up the 9 Bends of the Heaven River Formation, it was already a month later. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing sent out a beam of divine light with his palms and activated the 9 Bends of the Heaven River Formation. Endless starlight surged from the void and quickly condensed into 9 silver heavenly rivers. The 9 heavenly rivers danced in the air like divine dragons, spiraling up and down. A huge door immediately appeared at the exit of the grotto. It led to the peak of Sky Crane Mountain. Once the divine formation was activated, it would continuously absorb the power of the stars. As long as the stars in the void were not destroyed, the divine power of the divine formation would never be depleted. Moreover, as time passed, the divine formation's power would also grow stronger. After a while, Ji Tianqing sent out a beam of divine light with his palms and closed the door to the exit. He turned and flew into the depths of the Xuanji Grotto. He entered a secluded palace among the mountains and began to cultivate. This palace was one of the holy grounds of the Xuanji Grotto for seclusion. The entire palace was made of rare materials. It had the effect of gathering and purifying divine power. It could also clear one's soul and will and improve one's comprehension. Ji Tianqing entered the secret chamber of the palace. He took out the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and entered the distorted spacetime. He used a month to set up the formation. In the distorted spacetime, everyone had been recuperating in seclusion for more than 4 years. When he returned to the Blood Flame Sacred Tree and saw Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others, everyone's appearance had returned to normal. They were no longer in a sorry state and tired state. Their injuries had also recovered by more than half. They were still focused on healing their injuries. Ji Tianqing did not disturb them. He meditated and cultivated under the sacred tree, silently recovering his divine power. Although he had only suffered minor injuries in the previous battle, he had used up a lot of his divine power. After the battle, he did not recuperate. Instead, he spent another month setting up the formation. No matter how strong his willpower was, he could not take it anymore. He felt tired. Therefore, he first recuperated for 3 months. He recovered to his peak condition and healed his injuries. Then, he began to count the spoils of war. He stored the 150 Godhead fragments separately. He would need them later on for his cultivation. The main objects of inventory were the hundreds of spatial rings and the resources moved from the 2 treasure vault. The owners of the hundreds of spatial rings were all godly king experts. They were either the leaders of first-rate forces, the sect masters, or the masters of various regions. In short, each of them held great power and controlled a large amount of wealth and resources. Naturally, these spatial rings also stored a large amount of cultivation resources and treasures. Ji Tianqing used 2 days to count the hundreds of spatial rings and put the resources and treasures into his own spatial ring. It was difficult to calculate the exact value of these resources and treasures. However, after a rough estimate, there were at least 30 trillion. The value of the 2 treasure vaults in the Xuanji Grotto was close to 70 trillion. Therefore, Ji Tianqing's wealth and resources exceeded 100 trillion. Chapter 3798. Cultivation resources worth hundreds of trillions of divine stones. This was the most wealth Ji Tianqing had ever obtained in his life. It was the wealthiest moment of his life. He was in a good mood. However, it was just a good mood. He was not too excited about it. After all, he was now an upper godly king. His combat strength was comparable to a peak godly king. He could even fight a peak godly king. At his level, his insight and knowledge were beyond the reach of ordinary godly spirit. As long as he was willing, he could inherit the myriad demon alliance. He could even control the entire Star Source continent and become the master of this continent. Compared to the position of the overlord of the continent, hundreds of trillions of divine stones were nothing. The entire continent was his. He could get as much wealth and resources as he wanted. To him, cultivation resources would become external objects when they reached a certain level. The most important thing was still strength. Therefore, after he checked his spoils of war, he began to refine the Godhead fragments to quickly increase his strength. Borrowing the power of the heaven-mending pearl, 2 white light vortexes appeared in his palms and quickly devoured the Godhead fragments. As time passed, the Godhead fragments were devoured and turned into nothingness. On the other hand, he had obtained a vast amount of divine power, and he had also obtained many divine runes of laws from the quintessence fragment. His strength increased rapidly, and the number of divine Tao laws he condensed increased. Even though he was cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime, he had a mysterious connection with the 9 bends of heaven rivers formation at the entrance of the mysterious grotto. Once an expert attacked the formation or barged into the mysterious grotto, he would be able to sense it. Unfortunately, the 9 bends of heaven rivers formation did not move for a long time. It had been 3 months since the decisive battle between the Myriad Demon Alliance and the mysterious grotto. The process and final result of the decisive battle had spread throughout the Starsource continent. Everyone knew about it. In these 3 months, the entire Starsource continent was in a state of shock and madness. Not only were the forces of the various regions and empires discussing it, but even the common people on the streets and alleys were talking about it. No one could believe that the mysterious grotto that had ruled the Starsource continent for more than 20,000 years was conquered by the Myriad Demon Alliance just like that. In the eyes of the common people, the Xuanji Grotto was a supreme and unparalleled existence. Even though the Myriad Demon Alliance was a superforce that had risen to fame in the past 1,000 years, it was still incomparable to the Enigma Paradise, much less a threat to the Enigma Paradise's dominance. Who would have thought that such a ridiculous scene would actually appear? Even though there were various versions of legends and news that were widely spread across the Starsource continent. However, the commoners found it hard to accept this result. They were shocked for a long time before they calmed down. The information that was flying everywhere was enough to reconstruct the process of the 10,000 Demon Alliance's conquest of the Xuanji Paradise. Under the deliberate propaganda of the Myriad Demon League, the people of the entire continent knew that the acting leader of the Myriad Demon League was a peak divine king, a wise and mighty overlord. It was this acting alliance master who had used his wits to break through the Xuanji Grotto's defenses. He had defeated the peak godly kings invited by the Xuanji Grotto. Elder Golden Rock was easier to deal with. According to the news released by the 10,000 Demon Alliance, he was described as a wise man who followed the will of the heavens. However, the Battle Whale Divine King was unlucky. He had become Long Tion's background and a stepping stone for Long Tion's fame. As the news spread, the news that the Myriad Demon League was going to take over the Starsource continent also spread across the continent. Long Tion's unparalleled fame had also become a household name, reverberating like thunder in the ears. After 3 months, the impact of the news of the Myriad Demon League's victory on the commoners gradually weakened. However, one could foresee that it would take at least a few years for the shock to fade away. By then, the wariness and resistance of the territorial lords, the various top forces, and the various major races towards the Myriad Demon League would gradually disappear. Only then would the Myriad Demon League's takeover of the Starsource continent begin gradually. It was not something that could be completed overnight. Ji Tianxing's prediction of 50 years was more logical. Of course, this was based on the assumption that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was eliminated without any accident. If the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was not eliminated, there would always be a huge threat. With the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's prestige and charisma on the continent, he could easily summon countless forces and experts to help him destroy the Myriad Demon League and take back his position as the Overlord. It was because of this that Ji Tianxing had stayed in the Xuanji Grotto Heaven alone to wait for the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's return. At the same time, the Myriad Demon League was also doing their best to investigate and find out more about the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor. They had to find out where the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was and when he would return to the Dragon Realm. Also, the Chief of Internal Affairs and the Left and Right Protectors had contacted Alliance leader Luo Ho twice after returning to the Myriad Demon City. They had conveyed the details of the battle and Ji Tianxing's instructions to Alliance leader Luo Ho. Alliance leader Luo Ho also knew the importance of this matter, and decided to postpone the matter in the Outer Realm and return to the Dragon Realm to oversee the Myriad Demon League. However, the Starsource continent in the outer realm was too far away from the Dragon realm. Even if he rushed back at full speed, he would not be able to return in a few months. Ji Tianxing had been cultivating in seclusion for 8 years in the distorted spacetime and had only managed to refine the 150 quintessence fragment. Now that he had reached the late 7th Heaven God King realm, he had obtained another 80 divine Tao laws from the quintessence fragment. The number of divine Tao laws he grasped thus reached as many as 830 type. Without a doubt, he had gained a lot from his seclusion and his combat strength had increased by 2 times. After finishing his cultivation, Ji Tianxing left the distorted spacetime and patrolled the Xuanji Grotto Heaven again. There was nothing unusual about the entrance of the Grotto Heaven and the interior of the Grotto Heaven. In the past few months, no one had infiltrated the Xuanji Grotto Heaven and no one had dared to attack the entrance. At this moment, apart from Ji Tianxing, there were only endless cultivation resources and natural treasures in the Xuanji Wonderland. He was slightly disappointed and prayed silently in his heart that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor would return soon and stop wasting time. This was the only way he could get rid of the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor as soon as possible. After getting rid of this huge problem, the Myriad Demon League would be able to smoothly take over the Starsource continent. At that time, he could leave with peace of mind and head to other continents to continue his search for Wu Hen. After patrolling the Grotto Heaven for 3 days, Ji Tianxing returned to the secret chamber in the Celestial Palace and entered the distorted spacetime to continue his seclusion. This time, he would use up a huge amount of cultivation resources and divine pills to comprehend and deduce the heaven-punishing divine skill in order to strengthen his foundation of the divine Tao and improve his mystique skills. If possible, he wanted to break through to the 8th Heaven God King realm. If he could break through to the 8th Heaven God King realm before the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor returned, he would have a greater chance of defeating the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor. Chapter 3799. Time passed quickly in the Xuanji Utopia. It was quiet and dull. Ji Tianxing had been cultivating in seclusion in the secret chamber of the Divine Palace. He was trying his best to strengthen his foundation and break through to the 8th level of the Divine King realm. At the same time, he was waiting for news from the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor. Unfortunately, the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor had not made a move even though he was getting closer and closer to the 8th level of the Divine King realm. At the same time, the 3,000 soldiers of the Myriad Demon Alliance were recovering in seclusion in the Myriad Demon City and their various branches. The Myriad Demon Alliance had won the battle a few months ago. However, they had also suffered a huge blow. They had lost too many experts and were greatly weakened. In the past few months, the Myriad Demon Alliance had been recuperating and did not take the opportunity to expand their forces and territory. This was Ji Tianxing's intention. The Chief of Internal Affairs and the left and right protectors understood his intentions and supported this decision. After all, as long as the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was not eliminated, the Myriad Demon Alliance would return sooner or later even if they took over the entire continent. Therefore, it was better for them to recuperate and gradually take over the entire continent after the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was eliminated. Of course, this was only part of the reason. The more important reason was that the Starsource continent was still in a period of turmoil. The news of the Myriad Demon Alliance conquering the Xuanji Utopia was still widely spread and discussed. The shock and astonishment of the billions of people had yet to be calmed down. The Myriad Demon Alliance's intelligence organization had investigated. Most people thought that this was a chaotic situation. The change of the Overlord would definitely cause chaos on the continent. Therefore, it was not an exaggeration to say that the Starsource continent was in a state of panic. Countless people were worried and countless forces were on tenterhooks. Furthermore, there were even countless people who were prepared to flee to avoid disaster. This was because everyone believed that the myriad demon alliance conquering the Xuanji utopia was only the beginning of a great war. When the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor returned and gathered his forces to launch a counterattack, the real war would begin. The people did not care who won or lost. They were only afraid that the flames of war would spread across the entire continent and affect them. Of course, there were also many experts and factions who were hesitating and observing the situation. They did not belong to any faction, but they wanted to obtain the corresponding status and benefits from this unprecedented war. There were also some subordinate forces of the abstruse Grotto Heaven and the old subordinates of the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor. They were currently hiding in grief, but they were secretly colluding with each other. Naturally, they were unwilling to admit defeat. They were still thinking of ways to preserve their strength and wait for the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor to return so that they could make a comeback. Naturally, the 10,000 Demon Alliance was not idle either. The elites who had participated in the battle were indeed in seclusion to heal their wounds. However, the other 20,000-plus alliance members who did not participate in the war had become extremely busy in the past few months. Other than the normal operations of the 10,000 Demon Alliance, they had to carry out a lot of missions. For example, investigating the whereabouts and news of the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was a top priority. Another example was investigating the forces and experts who were extremely loyal to the Xuanji Grotto and couldn't bear to part with them, and secretly eliminating and assassinating them. Another example would be to drive a wedge between the factions that belonged to the Xuanji utopia but were only interested in survival and profit, and did not have much loyalty. In addition, he also had to persuade and pacify those fence-sitters who were swaying left and right. The 10,000 Demon Alliance would use all kinds of methods to pacify them, regardless of whether they were first-rate forces or godly king experts. If they could be recruited into the 10,000 Demon Alliance, that would be the best. Even if they could not be recruited into the 10,000 Demon Alliance, they had to ensure that these fence-sitters would not side with the Xuanji Grotto and go against the 10,000 Demon Alliance. Of course, there was one more thing that the 10,000 Demon Alliance had been carrying out. That was to create rumors and deliberately spread all kinds of opinions. Ao Jinying had always been in charge of this. He was very familiar with this kind of work. Before the 10,000 Demon Alliance attacked the Xuanji Grotto, Ao Jinying had already done something similar. His goal was to manipulate public opinion and stir up the discussion of countless people on the continent, as well as achieve the effect of propaganda and bewitchment. To put it simply, he wanted to brainwash the billions of people so that they would gradually accept the 10,000 Demon Alliance as the ruler of the Starsource continent. Moreover, he wanted to smear and weaken the image of the Xuanji Grotto, lowering the prestige of the Xuanji Grotto in the hearts of the people. These were only some of the things that the 10,000 Demon Alliance had been doing in the past few months. There were many more complicated things that could not be explained in a few words. Fortunately, the 10,000 Demon Alliance had enough members and recruited the elites of all walks of life. They were good at all kinds of tasks. Ji Tianxing, the left and right protectors, the general manager of internal affairs, the elders, and the others only needed to discuss the countermeasures and issue orders. If they were asked to do these trivial things in person, there was no telling how many years it would take to finish them. All in all, the 10,000 Demon Alliance was not expanding, not waging war, and not in a hurry to take over the Starsource continent. However, the 10,000 Demon Alliance was not doing nothing. They were still actively preparing and paving the way for the takeover of the Starsource continent. Although Ji Tianxing was far away in the Xuanji Grotto, he had made a plan long ago. He asked the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying, and the others to act according to the plan. Ao Jinying was in charge of collecting information and carrying out assassinations. Hu Xinyue was in charge of appeasing and buying people's hearts. The left and right protectors were in charge of destroying the forces that were very loyal to the Xuanji Grotto. Everything was carried out in an orderly manner. If the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor appeared, Ji Tianxing would naturally deal with him and think of a way to eliminate him. If the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor did not appear, then as time passed, the hearts and minds of the people on the Star Source continent would change. Perhaps after 10 or 8 years, the people's hearts would no longer be with the Xuanji Grotto, but the 10,000 Demon Alliance. At that time, even if the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor returned to the Star Source continent, it would be impossible for him to gather his former subordinates and launch a counterattack against the 10,000 Demon Alliance. This was Ji Tianxing's plan. He was preparing for both sides so that the 10,000 Demon Alliance could smoothly rise to power. Unknowingly, an entire year had passed in the turmoil of the Star Source continent. In this entire year, the undercurrents of the Star Source continent were surging. The situation was very chaotic and complicated. However, under the secret control of the 10,000 Demon Alliance, no major chaos occurred. There were no wars or large-scale massacres. However, many forces and experts had quietly left the Star Source continent to seek shelter in other places. This was something that no one could avoid. There were also many forces and God King experts who could not resist the temptation of the 10,000 Demon Alliance and changed their allegiance to the 10,000 Demon Alliance. Other than that, a few forces that belonged to the Xuanji Grotto and were extremely loyal to the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor disappeared without anyone noticing. There was no doubt that it was the 10,000 Demon Alliance who did it. Everyone knew that once the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor returned, those forces would definitely respond to the Gold Origin Dragon Emperor's orders and launch a counterattack against the 10,000 Demon Alliance. Since that was the case, the 10,000 Demon Alliance naturally had to eliminate them as soon as possible to prevent future disasters. However, the 10,000 Demon Alliance purposely concealed the news to prevent this elimination of dissidents from causing panic among the people.